The Abilene paradox is a strange thing that happens in groups. It's when people go along with a decision that none of them really want, because each person thinks everyone else wants it. No one speaks up, so the group ends up doing something that nobody truly supports. This usually happens in families, teams, workplaces, and other situations where people don't want to rock the boat. The name comes from a story told by Jerry B. Harvey, a management expert. In the story, a family in Texas is sitting on a porch on a hot afternoon.
I'd love to invite you to share in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It's incredible to think about how we're all connected through these stories and ideas. If you enjoy these thought-provoking explorations, consider subscribing to Tired Thinker so we can keep bringing you reflective narratives. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and let your imagination drift as we delve into the mind-boggling paradoxes and mysteries.
Someone says, "Let's go to Abilene." It's a long drive, it's hot, and there's dust everywhere. But everyone agrees to go. They get there, have a bad meal, and come back tired and irritated. Later, it turns out that none of them wanted to go in the first place. Each person agreed because they thought everyone else wanted to go. They didn't want to cause conflict or seem difficult. So they all ended up doing something they disliked just to keep peace. This happens more than people think. A common place to see it is at work. Imagine a project team sitting in a meeting. Someone suggests a new direction. It's risky, and most of the team members feel unsure, but no one wants to be the one who says no. They fear looking negative or uncooperative. Each person nods and agrees. Later, the project fails. When people talk about it afterward, it becomes clear that no one actually thought it was a good idea to begin with. The Abilene paradox is not the same as groupthink, although they look similar. Groupthink is when everyone in a group truly believes in a bad decision because they're under pressure to conform. The Abilene paradox is different. In this case, the group goes along with something even though each person privately disagrees. The problem is not a lack of critical thinking, it's a failure to communicate honestly. Fear plays a big role in this paradox. People often want to avoid conflict. They don't want to look like troublemakers. They want to protect relationships. They assume that staying quiet and going along is safer than speaking up. Sometimes they think, maybe I'm the only one who feels this way. That thought alone can keep someone silent. This silence leads to what Harvey called mismanaged agreement. It looks like everyone agrees. In reality, they're all pretending to agree. The group's final choice reflects no one's true opinion. It's a false consensus built on fear, not real support. A team working on a software product offers another example. The client asks for a change that doesn't make sense. The lead developer knows the change will break several features. A designer also sees the issue. A product manager has doubts too, but each person believes the others are on board. No one wants to be seen as the blocker, so they go ahead. Weeks later, the system crashes and client trust drops. Only then do they talk and find out that no one ever supported the change. They all just assumed someone else did. Avoiding the Abilene paradox takes effort. The most important thing is open and honest communication. Leaders play a big role in this. If the leader welcomes dissent and asks for true opinions, people are more likely to speak up. When a leader says, "If anyone sees a problem, please say so," and follows that up by listening, the group works better. But if leaders punish disagreement or make people feel small for raising doubts, silence will win. Sometimes teams use tools to break the silence. One simple method is to go around the room and ask each person what they truly think, starting with the most junior member. This helps reduce the pressure to agree with the highest-ranking person. Another approach is to ask for concerns before asking for agreement. For example, a manager might say, "What's wrong with this plan?" before saying, "Do we all agree?" That small shift gives people room to raise issues without feeling like they're breaking unity. A real-world case happened in a hospital. A senior doctor made a call during surgery that seemed risky. A nurse felt the decision might harm the patient. A junior doctor had doubts too, but no one spoke up. Afterward, when complications occurred, it turned out that several team members had the same worry. They just didn't speak because they feared the senior doctor's reaction. They didn't want to embarrass anyone or look like they were overstepping. The team took the patient to Abilene, in a sense, because no one wanted to challenge what they thought was the group's decision. The paradox also shows up in everyday life. Think about a group of friends trying to pick a restaurant. One person says, "Let's get sushi." No one really wants sushi, but everyone says, "Sure." They don't want to be difficult or seem picky. Later, someone says, "I actually don't like sushi much." Then another admits the same. They all realize that no one wanted it, but everyone said yes to avoid conflict. They could have enjoyed something else, but they didn't talk honestly. Even families fall into this trap. A couple might move to a new city because one partner thinks the other wants to. Years go by. They both feel unhappy. One day, they admit that neither of them wanted to move. They just thought the other did. This kind of silent miscommunication can shape big life decisions. The paradox also hides in organizations with strong cultures. If the culture values harmony over honesty, the risk grows. People begin to see disagreement as betrayal. In that kind of place, people may fake agreement to keep their jobs or protect their standing. Over time, the organization loses touch with reality. It starts making bad decisions, not because people lack ideas, but because they don't share them. Breaking the cycle means naming the problem. Teams that talk openly about the Abilene paradox are less likely to fall into it. If people understand that false agreement can lead to real problems, they're more likely to pause and ask, "Do we really want this?" That question alone can stop a trip to Abilene. New team members often feel this pressure the most. They don't know the dynamics. They want to fit in. If they see others agreeing, they assume that's the safe path. But when teams normalize disagreement and curiosity, new voices add value right away. If someone asks, "Is this really our best move?" and hears, "Thanks for asking," they learn that speaking up is okay. A company once built a major campaign based on a single idea, pitched by a well-liked executive. No one else in the room thought the idea was good, but everyone smiled and said yes. The campaign launched, failed, and cost millions. Later reviews showed that multiple people had doubts, but none of them spoke because they assumed the group was on board. That one unchallenged yes steered the whole ship toward failure. The Abilene paradox reminds us that agreement isn't always a sign of alignment. Sometimes it's just fear wearing a mask. Teams, families, and groups that care about each other must learn to speak up, not to argue, but to stay honest. Because the worst kind of mistake is one that everyone sees coming, but no one tries to stop. The Allais paradox shows how people often make choices that go against the predictions of expected utility theory. This theory assumes that people always make rational decisions when facing uncertainty. They should choose the option with the highest expected utility, which is a kind of weighted average of all possible outcomes. But the Allais paradox proves that many people don't do that. They make inconsistent choices when the same logic should apply in both cases. Maurice Allais, a French economist, came up with this paradox in 1953. He designed a pair of choice problems that look similar on paper, but often lead people to make different decisions. The setup is simple. Imagine two questions. In the first one, you have to choose between two options. Option A, you get $1 million for sure. Option B, you have a 10% chance of getting $5 million, an 89% chance of getting $1 million, and a 1% chance of getting nothing. Most people pick option A. It feels safe. You walk away with a guaranteed million. Option B has a 1% chance you get nothing. That 1% seems to carry a lot of weight, even though there's also a 10% chance you get 5 times as much. Emotion plays a role here. The fear of ending up with nothing, even if the chance is small, makes people avoid the risk. Now consider the second question. Again, you choose between two options. Option C, you have an 11% chance of getting $1 million and an 89% chance of getting nothing. Option D, you have a 10% chance of getting $5 million and a 90% chance of getting nothing. This time, most people choose option D. The guaranteed outcome is gone, so people start comparing the upside. The 10% chance at $5 million looks better than an 11% chance at $1 million. The risk is there either way, so people lean toward the higher payoff. Here's where the paradox kicks in. If you follow expected utility theory, your preference in the second question should match your preference in the first. The two sets of options are just scaled versions of each other, but many people choose A in the first and D in the second. That creates an inconsistency. Let's break this down more. In both cases, option A and option C involve $1 million. In the first case, you're guaranteed it. In the second, you have a small chance. In option B and option D, you have a shot at $5 million, but with some chance of getting nothing. The only real difference between the two scenarios is that the first includes a sure outcome. That certainty seems to sway people. This behavior challenges the independence axiom in expected utility theory. The axiom says that if you prefer one gamble over another, you should still prefer it if both are mixed with the same third option in the same way. But the choices in the Allais paradox suggest that certainty changes how people feel about risk. To see this more clearly, imagine you're offered these bets in real life. Someone says, you can walk away with $1 million now, no questions asked. Most people would grab it. The comfort of certainty pulls them in. Now imagine the same person says, you have a small chance to win either $1 million or $5 million. Suddenly, you weigh the odds differently. You don't have the safety net. The emotional response changes. That shift drives the paradox. Some researchers argue that people don't actually violate expected utility theory because they never followed it in the first place. Instead, they use what's called prospect theory. This theory, developed by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, says people value gains and losses differently. They feel losses more strongly than gains. They also weigh probabilities in ways that don't match actual math. A 1% chance of disaster might feel like a 10% chance emotionally. Prospect theory helps explain the Allais paradox. When a sure gain is on the table, people overvalue it. When all outcomes are risky, they go for the higher potential reward. Their sense of risk is distorted by how the options are framed. Framing plays a huge role. In the first scenario, the sure thing is framed as a win. It's hard to give that up. In the second, there's no sure win, so the framing shifts to what's most exciting. That changes the emotional reaction and the final choice. Let's consider another example. Say you're offered this. Option A, a 100% chance to win $1,000. Option B, a 10% chance to win $10,000, a 90% chance to win nothing. Most people choose A. The sure $1,000 feels good. But now flip the framing. Option C, a 90% chance to lose nothing, a 10% to lose $10,000. Option D, a 100% chance to lose $1,000. Now people often pick C. Even though the math mirrors the previous setup, the framing of loss changes behavior. In gains, people avoid risk. In losses, they seek risk. That shift mirrors the Allais paradox. It shows how people's decisions depend more on context and framing than on consistent logic. These findings have real-world implications. In insurance, people pay extra to remove small risks, even if the math says it's a bad deal. They'd rather be certain of no loss. In gambling, people chase high payouts despite low odds. The Allais paradox shows that both behaviors come from the same place. People don't follow the expected utility curve. They follow a mix of emotion, perception, and bias. Even in business, decision-makers often prefer sure outcomes when facing potential gains and gamble more when trying to avoid losses. A company might accept a small profit now rather than risk a bigger one later. Or they might take huge risks to avoid a small loss. These patterns fit the Allais paradox well. The paradox doesn't mean people are irrational in a chaotic way. It means their sense of value and risk doesn't follow neat equations. Their logic is emotional, and emotions are sensitive to certainty, framing, and fear. That's not random, it's just different from what economists assumed for a long time. It's worth noting that not everyone behaves this way. Some people stick with expected utility logic. They calculate the weighted average and pick the higher number. But most people don't live their lives on spreadsheets. They respond to what feels safe or exciting or terrifying. That's why the Allais paradox still holds up, decades later. The paradox also challenges the idea that we can predict behavior with clean models. If people react differently depending on how the question is asked, then models need to include psychology, not just math. The Allais paradox sits at that intersection between economics and human nature. It reminds us that people aren't just calculators, they're people. The apportionment paradox happens when a method used to fairly divide something, like seats in a legislature, ends up creating results that feel unfair or even illogical. This paradox shows up most often in politics, especially when dividing congressional seats among states based on population. Even when everyone agrees on the rules beforehand, the final outcome can surprise people. The paradox doesn't mean anyone cheated or made a mistake. It means that sometimes numbers behave in ways that clash with what people see as fair. Imagine a country with 100 seats in its national legislature. These seats are given to states based on how many people live in each one. Say one state has 10% of the population, it should get 10 seats. Another has 20% and should get 20 seats. So far, so good. But populations don't break down that neatly. What if one state deserves 10.4 seats and another deserves 10.6? You can't give out fractions of seats, so you have to round. But how you round makes a big difference. The most common way to deal with this is to use a mathematical method. Several of these exist. Each one tries to get as close as possible to a fair division, but each one also opens the door to a few strange side effects. That's where the paradox comes in. There are three well-known examples of the apportionment paradox. They're known by the problems they cause: the Alabama paradox, the population paradox, and the new states paradox. The Alabama paradox happened in 1880. At the time, the US government used a method created by Alexander Hamilton to assign seats. That method worked by first giving each state the whole number of seats it deserved. Then it handed out the leftover seats, one at a time, to the states with the largest fractional remainders. That seemed fair, but then they decided to increase the total number of seats in Congress from 299 to 300. You might expect that no state would lose a seat because of this. After all, more seats should mean at least the same number for everyone, or maybe more. But Alabama lost a seat. To see why, imagine you and a group of friends are sharing 10 slices of pizza. Everyone gets about what they deserve based on how hungry they are. Now someone brings in one more slice. You might think everyone just gets a little more. But if the method you use to split the pizza changes based on that one extra slice, the smallest person might end up getting less. That's what happened to Alabama. The math shifted in a way that their share dropped. It wasn't because anyone changed the rules. The rules were the same. The increase in total seats caused the issue. Then there's the population paradox. This one happens when two states both grow in population, but one grows faster than the other. You'd think the faster-growing state would either gain a seat or at least not lose one. But with some methods, the slower-growing state can gain a seat at the expense of the faster-growing one. Take two states, State A and State B. State A has 1 million people, and State B has 2 million. A few years later, State A grows to 1.1 million, and State B grows to 2.2 million. State B grew more in absolute terms and at the same rate. You'd expect their shares of seats to stay the same. But with some methods, State A ends up with more seats and State B with fewer. This happens because the rounding process interacts badly with the population changes. The seats must be whole numbers, and the math doesn't always reward the state that grew more. It can even punish it. The third paradox is called the new states paradox. It's also known as the Oklahoma paradox because that's where it showed up. The problem occurs when a new state is added to the union and gets its fair share of seats. To make room, the total number of seats goes up. Again, you'd think this wouldn't hurt any of the existing states. But with some apportionment methods, adding a new state causes the distribution to shift in a way that changes seat counts for states that didn't change at all. One of them might lose a seat, even though its population stayed the same. It's like adding one more player to a team and then finding that one of the original players has to sit out more often, even though they didn't do anything differently. The method treats the whole group as a system, and a change in one part affects the others, even when it doesn't seem fair. All of this points to a deep problem. When you divide whole units, like seats in a legislature, based on proportions, you often run into trouble. Fractions don't split evenly. The law says you must assign whole seats, and so no method can be perfect. Some of the paradoxes arise no matter which method you choose. Each method makes trade-offs. Over time, The US has used several different methods to apportion congressional seats. Hamilton's method was one of the earliest. Later came Jefferson's method, Webster's method, and Huntington Hill, which is the one used today. Each of these tries to reduce the impact of paradoxes, but none gets rid of them completely. Hamilton's method is simple. It gives each state the whole number part of its quota. Then it distributes the leftover seats one by one, based on who has the biggest fractional remainder. It's fair in some ways, but can lead to the Alabama paradox. Jefferson's method adjusts the divisor, the number you divide each state's population by, so that when you round down all the quotas, the total number of seats fits. This method favors larger states because it always rounds down. It avoids the Alabama paradox, but isn't neutral. Webster's method rounds quotas to the nearest whole number. It's more balanced between large and small states. It can still lead to some odd results, but it doesn't favor big or small states as much. Huntington Hill uses geometric means to decide how to round. This method smooths out many of the problems and is considered fairer overall. But even it isn't perfect. Paradoxes can still occur, though they are less common. So why not just switch to a method that avoids all the paradoxes? Because such a method doesn't exist. The problem isn't with the methods, it's with the math. When you try to divide whole numbers based on fractions, you always lose something. Either someone gets more than their fair share, or someone gets less. And when you adjust the total by adding a seat, adding a state, or updating populations, the effects can ripple through the system in ways that don't seem to make sense. The apportionment paradox matters because it touches on fairness. When people see that a growing state loses a seat, or that adding more seats makes someone worse off, they question the legitimacy of the process. That's a real concern in a democracy, where representation is the foundation of government. Mathematicians and political scientists continue to study apportionment because it's not just a math puzzle. It's about how we make fair decisions in a system built on whole people and whole seats. Understanding these paradoxes doesn't solve them. But it does remind us that even with the best intentions and the fairest rules, outcomes don't always follow our expectations. Imagine you have a group of friends trying to decide where to eat. Each person has a different opinion. One prefers pizza, another likes sushi, and someone else wants burgers. To make a fair decision, you all vote. But when you try to turn everyone's preferences into a single group choice, you run into a problem. No matter how you count the votes, someone ends up feeling like their opinion doesn't count. This isn't just bad luck. It's part of a deep issue in how groups make decisions. That issue is what Arrow's impossibility theorem tries to explain. Arrow's impossibility theorem comes from economist Kenneth Arrow. He wanted to understand how individual choices turn into a fair group choice. He focused on something called social choice theory. That's the study of how we combine individual preferences into a group preference. It sounds simple, but Arrow found that it's not. He began with a few rules that seem reasonable. First, if everyone in the group prefers option A over option B, then the group should also prefer A over B. That sounds fair. Second, the group's choice between A and B should depend only on how people feel about A and B, not on how they feel about C or D. Third, the system shouldn't give one person special treatment. Everyone's vote should carry the same weight. These seem like basic rules. Arrow called them the criteria for a fair voting system. But then he showed that no system can meet all of them at once if there are 3 or more choices. That's the core of Arrow's theorem. You cannot take people's individual rankings of choices and turn them into one group ranking that meets all the fair rules. Something has to give. Let's go back to the restaurant example. Say 3 friends are voting on pizza, sushi, and burgers. The first friend ranks them pizza, sushi, burgers. The second ranks them sushi, burgers, pizza. The third ranks burgers, pizza, sushi. Now try to make a group ranking from these. Look at pizza versus sushi. 2 people prefer pizza over sushi, so the group should prefer pizza over sushi. Now look at sushi versus burgers. 2 people prefer sushi over burgers, so the group should prefer sushi over burgers. Finally, look at burgers versus pizza. 2 people prefer burgers over pizza, so the group should prefer burgers over pizza. But here's the problem. If the group prefers pizza over sushi, sushi over burgers, and burgers over pizza, the preferences loop in a circle. That's not a clear ranking. The group can't decide what it likes best. This is called a voting cycle, or Condorcet cycle. It shows that majority rule doesn't always give a clean answer. Arrow proved that no matter how you set up the rules, if you try to follow all the fairness criteria, you'll run into problems like this. The only way to avoid the problem is to break one of the fairness rules. For example, you might let one person decide everything. That's called a dictatorship, and it avoids the cycle, but it's clearly unfair. Or you might allow outside factors to affect the choice, which breaks the rule that says only the rankings between two items should matter. People often think that if we just find the right voting system, we can make fair group decisions. Arrow's theorem says that's not always possible. It's not a flaw in the system, it's a limit on what systems can do. This might sound abstract, but it affects real-life decisions. Think about elections. Suppose voters rank 3 candidates. Candidate A is ranked higher than B by most people. B's is ranked higher than C, but C is ranked higher than A. The group preference loops, just like in the restaurant case. No matter how the election is run, the result can feel unfair to someone. Even if the process follows all the rules, it can still lead to an outcome that doesn't match what people really want. Another example is in committee decisions. Suppose a company has to choose between 3 plans. Different departments have different priorities. When they vote, they might end up in a cycle where no plan gets full support, and any 2 departments can block the third. The group can't move forward, even though each member has a clear ranking. Some systems try to work around Arrow's problem. For example, ranked choice voting asks voters to rank the options, then eliminates the least popular choices one at a time. But this method doesn't always follow the fairness rules. It can still give results where the group preference depends on irrelevant options or where some votes count more than others. Others use a point system, like the board account. Voters rank the choices, and each rank gives a different number of points. The option with the most points wins. This system avoids some cycles, but it breaks the rule about ignoring irrelevant choices. If someone changes their ranking of a non-winning option, it can change who wins. Arrow's theorem doesn't say we can't make group decisions. It says we have to choose which fairness rule we're willing to give up. That means every voting system makes trade-offs. There's no perfect method. Some people argue this makes democracy flawed, but that's not the right way to look at it. Arrow's theorem doesn't say democracy is bad. It says we need to understand its limits. No system can turn personal opinions into a perfect group decision. So we need to think about which values matter most to us: equality, simplicity, stability, and choose systems that match those values. In practice, that often means using systems that work well enough. They might not follow all the fairness rules, but they give clear results and seem fair to most people. The key is knowing where the weaknesses are, so we don't pretend they don't exist. Arrow's theorem also applies beyond voting. It affects any decision where we try to combine individual judgments. That includes things like product rankings, search engine results, or even AI systems that weigh different user preferences. Anytime you try to go from many inputs to one output, you face the same problem. Suppose you run a website that ranks restaurants based on user reviews. Users rate restaurants differently. If you try to turn those ratings into one ranking list, you're doing social choice. If you want your list to be fair, you might face the same issues Arrow described. That's why recommendation systems sometimes feel off. They try to average out many views, but there's no perfect way to do it. Arrow's work changed how we think about fairness. Before him, people assumed that with the right setup, you could make group decisions that truly reflect what people want. Arrow showed that's not always possible. That insight shapes how we build systems today. It reminds us that trade-offs are part of every decision rule, and that being clear about those trade-offs matters more than pretending they don't exist. Burr faced a dilemma that most people don't talk about. It wasn't just about politics or power. It was about trust. It was about loyalty. And it was about choices that don't have clean answers. Burr had ambition, sure. He wanted to lead, to shape the country in ways he thought would work. But ambition alone doesn't explain what happened between him and Alexander Hamilton. To understand the Burr dilemma, you have to slow down and look at what each man stood for and why their paths were always going to crash into each other. Burr came from a good family. His father was the president of Princeton. His grandfather was Jonathan Edwards, a respected preacher and philosopher. He had expectations on him from the beginning. But Burr didn't always follow the expected path. He joined the army and served in the Revolutionary War. He rose fast. George Washington didn't like him much, though. That early tension between what Burr thought he deserved and what others allowed him to have followed him for the rest of his life. After the war, Burr went into law. He was good at it. He was sharp, quick on his feet, and hard to rattle in court. He knew how to read people. He got into politics in New York, and for a time, he and Hamilton seemed to operate in similar spaces. Both were lawyers. Both were war veterans. Both were powerful voices in the Federalist era. But the similarities ended there. Hamilton was loud about his ideas. He wrote constantly. He picked fights. He wanted a strong central government. He pushed for a national bank. He liked rules and structure. Burr, on the other hand, kept his thoughts close. He didn't publish his positions often. He avoided public arguments. That made people uneasy. They called him slippery. In truth, Burr just didn't like to show his hand unless he had to. That quiet nature didn't sit well in a time when shouting your ideas was a sign of strength. The biggest moment in Burr's political career came in 1800. That year, he ran for president against Thomas Jefferson. They were supposed to be on the same team. Burr was Jefferson's running mate, but they tied in the Electoral College. That wasn't supposed to happen. The Constitution didn't have a clean fix for it. The election went to the House of Representatives. Now Burr had a choice. He could step aside and let Jefferson take the presidency. That's what people expected. Or he could try to win it himself. Technically, nothing stopped him from doing it. And people whispered in his ear. They told him he could be president if he played his cards right. So Burr didn't step aside. He didn't push to win either, not directly. He just didn't remove himself from the race. That silence spoke volumes. Jefferson didn't forget that. Even after he became president, he froze Burr out of any real power. Burr served as vice president, but he had little to do. He presided over the Senate, where he was fair and effective. In fact, his handling of vice president duties was probably one of the few parts of his career where people across the board respected him. But the trust between him and Jefferson was broken. Then came the duel. By 1804, Burr knew his political career was ending. He ran for governor of New York and lost. Hamilton had spoken against him during the campaign. It wasn't the first time. Hamilton had attacked Burr's character for years. Burr believed Hamilton's words cost him elections. At one dinner, Hamilton reportedly said something even more damaging. Burr wanted to know what it was. He wrote to Hamilton asking for a retraction. Hamilton wouldn't give it. He danced around the question, refusing to say sorry or back down. In that time, dueling was illegal but still practiced. It was seen as a way to defend honor. Burr challenged Hamilton. Hamilton accepted. Both men went to Weehawken, New Jersey, across the river from New York City, where dueling laws were softer. On the morning of July 11, 1804, they faced each other. Hamilton fired into the air. Burr shot Hamilton in the stomach. Hamilton died the next day. That one act destroyed Burr's life. He was charged with murder in New York and New Jersey. He had to flee. The charges were later dropped, but the damage was done. Burr became a political outcast. But here's where the real dilemma begins. The duel didn't just end Hamilton's life. It ended any real chance Burr had of rebuilding his own. So he tried something else. He went west. He got involved in a vague and still murky plan to create a new country in the western part of North America. Maybe he wanted to take Spanish territory. Maybe he wanted to split off part of the US. No one really knows what his goal was. Burr spoke in half plans and vague ideas, always just enough to keep interest alive without giving away too much. That plan failed too. He was arrested and tried for treason. The trial became a national event. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Marshall, presided over it. Thomas Jefferson pushed for a conviction. He saw Burr as a threat, but Burr was acquitted. There wasn't enough evidence that he had actually acted on any plan to overthrow the government. He may have talked a lot, but talk alone isn't treason. Still, The trial wrecked what was left of his public life. Burr left the country for a few years. He lived in Europe, mostly in exile. When he returned to the United States, he was no longer a figure of power. He practiced law again. He lived modestly. People rarely asked him about politics. Looking back, Burr's story isn't clean. He made choices that don't fit into neat boxes. He didn't go all in on any one ideology. That's why historians struggle to place him. He wasn't a hero, but he wasn't purely a villain either. He played the political game like a chess match. Every move was calculated. He rarely showed emotion. That made him look cold. But it also protected him in a brutal era of American politics. Take the moment when he presided over the impeachment trial of Supreme Court Justice Samuel Chase. Burr, as vice president, had to act as judge. He handled the role with calm and fairness. Even people who disliked him admitted he did the job well. In another life, Burr might have become Chief Justice himself. He had the skill, he had the mind, but trust matters in politics, and Burr, by holding his cards so close, lost that trust. His dilemma wasn't just about Hamilton, it was about how far someone can go without showing who they are. Burr believed in personal ambition, in careful planning, and in staying flexible. But a system built on public faith needs more than quiet skill. It needs visible loyalty. Burr never gave that. And in the end, he paid for it. Not with death, not with prison, but with erasure. His name faded. He became the man who killed Hamilton. The rest of his life, his early bravery, his legal brilliance, his time as vice president, got pushed aside. That's the weight of his choices. That's the heart of the Burr dilemma. The Chainstore paradox is a problem in game theory. It shows how logic can go against what we see in the real world. The paradox deals with how large firms treat smaller competitors. Specifically, it asks why a powerful chain store would lower prices to fight small new entrants, even when that move doesn't make sense if everyone acts rationally. The paradox is tied to reputation and the role it plays in shaping future behavior. Imagine a large national grocery chain. It's profitable and has stores across the country. A small local grocery store opens in a new town. The chain has a choice: ignore the newcomer and keep prices the same, or cut prices to drive the smaller store out. Cutting prices hurts profits in the short term. According to classic game theory, the large store should not fight the entrant. If the small store only affects one town and the large chain can't change prices elsewhere, there's no gain in starting a price war. Yet in practice, many chains fight hard to keep new stores out. That's where the paradox begins. This paradox came from economist Reinhard Selten in 1978. He pointed out the difference between what theory predicts and what companies actually do. In a one-time game, there's no reason for the chain store to fight. But in real life, markets are not one-shot games. There are many potential entrants watching how the large chain responds. If the chain store lets one new competitor in without resistance, others may follow. If it crushes the first competitor, it might scare off future ones. The chain may accept short-term losses to protect long-term market power. This is how reputation enters the model. Let's break this down further. Suppose there are 10 towns without chain stores. In each town, a new entrant considers opening a store. Each one decides in turn, not all at once. The chain store faces the same decision each time: fight or ignore. If the chain always ignores, each entrant sees a safe opportunity. If the chain fights the first entrant and makes it clear that it will do the same in every town, the rest may back off. Even if fighting means a short-term loss, it can be worth it if it keeps others from trying. Here is the core of the paradox. In the final town, the 10th one, the chain has no reason to fight. There are no more future towns to defend. The chain should let the entrant stay. If the entrant knows this, it will enter. The same logic applies to the 9th town. If the chain will not fight in the 10th, it has no reason to fight in the 9th. The entrant will enter, and so on. This backward logic, known as backward induction, leads to a strange result. If everyone is rational and knows everyone else is rational, the chain never fights. Every new store enters, and the chain's reputation means nothing. Yet in the real world, we see chains fight early and fight hard. Why? One answer is that people don't always use backward induction. They don't look all the way to the end of the game. Early entrants might not be sure what the chain will do. The chain might look irrational in the short term, but protect its profits in the long run. This is often called a reputation effect. The chain wants to build a reputation for being tough. Even if the chain never actually punishes entrants at the end of the line, the threat may be enough to deter entry at the start. Think of a teacher who gives a pop quiz to the first student who shows up late. The rest of the class gets the message. The teacher may never give another quiz. The point is to build a belief. Show up late and something bad might happen. The Chainstore behaves the same way. It punishes the first entrant so that others don't want to test it. But there's a catch. For the reputation effect to work, the chain has to care about how it's seen. It also has to convince future entrants that it will keep fighting even if it loses money now. That requires either a lack of perfect rationality or a belief that the chain may act in a non-standard way. This leads to an idea called incomplete information. Future entrants may not know the chain's exact strategy. They may think the chain is the kind of company that will always fight. If there's even a small chance of that, it may not be worth entering. Let's run a scenario. A small bakery thinks about opening in a town where a big coffee chain has a strong presence. The bakery knows the chain might cut prices and flood the market with promotions. If that happens, the bakery will lose money and may shut down. The chain might also do nothing and keep prices the same. If the bakery believes there's a 30% chance of a price war, it may stay out. The chain wins by just having the threat. It doesn't need to act every time, just enough to be feared. This approach creates what's called a separating equilibrium. There are two types of chain stores, tough and soft. The tough type always fights. The soft type never does. The first time an entrant appears, the chain store acts tough. That move separates it from the soft type. If future entrants believe it is the tough type, they stay away. The chain keeps its turf. You can also think of this like poker. A player makes a big bet on a weak hand. If other players believe the bet, they fold. The bluff works. But if no one ever folds, the bluff loses money. The success of the bluff depends on what others believe. The chain store's price cuts are like a poker bluff. They only work if people believe the threat is real. The paradox shows the gap between textbook logic and what we see in business. In theory, rational actors should never fight when there's no gain. In practice, firms care about reputation, signaling, and long-term strategy. They act now to influence what others do later. The chain store paradox forces us to look at how information and belief shape outcomes. It shows how uncertainty, timing, and perception create room for strategies that seem irrational at first, but make sense when viewed as part of a longer game. In short, the paradox challenges pure logic. It reminds us that behavior is not just about direct payoffs, but about what others believe we will do next. Imagine three friends trying to decide what to eat for dinner. One prefers pizza over burgers and burgers over sushi. Another likes sushi more than pizza and pizza more than burgers. The third prefers burgers over sushi and sushi over pizza. Each friend ranks the three options from favorite to least favorite. When they compare each pair of choices, the group prefers pizza over burgers, sushi over pizza, and burgers over sushi. That result doesn't make sense. It loops back to where it started. This is the Condorcet paradox. The Condorcet paradox shows how group decisions can become inconsistent, even when every individual in the group has consistent preferences. It appears in voting systems where people rank their preferences instead of just picking one option. The paradox got its name from Nicolas de Condorcet, an 18th century French philosopher and mathematician who noticed this cycle in majority rule voting. To explain it simply, the paradox happens when a group prefers option A over option B over option C, and then unexpectedly, option C over option A. That's a cycle. Each preference seems rational on its own, but the full set of preferences creates a loop. No single option is the clear winner because the group's preferences contradict themselves. Let's look at a more specific case. Say there's an election with three candidates, Alice, Bob, and Carol. Voters rank the candidates from most to least preferred. Suppose there are 30 voters divided like this. 10 voters prefer Alice the most. They rank Bob second and Carol last. Another 10 voters prefer Bob first. They rank Carol second and put Alice last. The remaining 10 voters choose Carol as their top choice. They rank Alice second and place Bob last. Now we look at the pairwise matchups. Between Alice and Bob, 10 prefer Alice, first group, 10 prefer Bob, second group, and 10 prefer Carol, but rank Alice above Bob, third group. So Alice gets 20 votes over Bob's 10. Alice beats Bob. Next, Bob versus Carol. First group prefers Bob, second group prefers Bob, third group prefers Carol. That's 20 votes for Bob, 10 for Carol. Bob beats Carol. Now Carol versus Alice. First group prefers Alice, second group prefers Carol, third group prefers Carol. That's 20 votes for Carol, 10 for Alice. Carol beats Alice. We've hit a loop. Alice beats Bob, Bob beats Carol, and Carol beats Alice. There's no clear winner. Every candidate both wins and loses, depending on who they're compared against. This is a Condorcet cycle. In an ideal voting system, we'd expect that if most people prefer A over B and B over C, then they should also prefer A over C. That's called transitivity. But when we use majority voting on rankings, transitivity can break down. The group behaves differently from the individuals. This isn't just a weird math trick. It matters in real decision-making. Anytime people vote on more than two options using rankings or preferences, this problem can appear. Political elections are the obvious example, but it also happens in business meetings, committee decisions, and even informal group choices, like friends picking a movie or coworkers choosing a project plan. Suppose a team at work needs to pick a new software tool. 3 tools are on the table. Different departments rank them based on what they need. Marketing likes tool A best. Engineering prefers tool B. Design wants tool C. Each department ranks the others differently. When they vote on each pair of tools, they find A beats B, B beats C, and C beats A. No tool clearly wins. The cycle creates confusion. Even though every department made a clear choice, the group can't agree. This paradox also raises questions about fairness. In most cases, people want a voting method that gives consistent and fair results. But if the voting system can produce contradictory outcomes, is it really fair? It also opens the door for manipulation. If someone knows how the rest of the group is voting, they might rank choices in a strategic way, not to show what they truly prefer, but to influence the result. That's called tactical voting. Let's say you like candidate A the most, then B, then C. But if you think A can't win and the real contest is between B and C, you might rank B first to block C. In a system with cycles, these tactics become more common. People stop voting honestly and start trying to guess what others will do. That makes the process even messier. The paradox has led to many alternative voting systems. Some systems try to avoid cycles. Others accept that cycles might happen and use tiebreaker rules. The Condorcet method, for example, tries to find a candidate who would win every one-on-one contest. If there's no such candidate, it accepts the cycle and picks the least problematic option using secondary rules. But even those systems have trade-offs. Some are hard to understand. Others are tough to implement. In real-life elections, simplicity often wins. That's why many countries stick to basic systems like first past the post, where each voter picks one candidate and the one with the most votes wins. But those systems can ignore important preferences and often lead to strategic voting too. The Condorcet paradox reminds us that democracy is complex. Just because each person votes logically doesn't mean the group will act logically. The system we use to gather and count those votes affects the outcome. We think of voting as a way to reflect the will of the people, but how we ask the question and how we tally the answers can twist the result. Another way to look at it is through sports. Say there are 3 teams, Team X, Team Y, and Team Z. Team X beats Team Y in a match, Team Y beats Team Z, then Team Z beats Team X. No team is clearly better than the others. If you just look at the results one pair at a time, each team looks superior to one and inferior to another. That circular outcome can happen in playoffs and tournaments. Sports fans may shrug it off, but when it happens in voting, the stakes are higher. In the world of economics and social choice theory, the Condorcet paradox is one of many examples showing that group decision-making isn't always clean. People may want to believe that voting leads to clear answers, but math tells a different story. Even with good intentions, fair rules, and honest votes, a group can still run into contradictions. We can try to avoid the problem by reducing the number of options or by simplifying how we vote. But both of those come at a cost. Fewer options mean less choice. Simpler rules can miss key preferences. It's a balancing act. Every voting system faces trade-offs between fairness, clarity, and strategy. Some argue that the paradox is a good thing. It shows that no one option dominates all others. In that sense, the cycle forces compromise. If there's no clear winner, maybe the group needs to talk it out, adjust the options, or come up with a solution everyone can live with. That approach can lead to better decisions, but it takes more time and effort, and not every group is willing to do that. In small groups, people might resolve the paradox by discussing their preferences and coming to a shared understanding. But in large elections or formal settings, there's often no room for that kind of negotiation. The system must decide. And if the system allows cycles, then sometimes the result will seem arbitrary, or worse, unfair. The Condorcet paradox shows that preferences are more complex than they seem. It warns us not to assume that majority rule always leads to sensible outcomes. It invites us to think carefully about how we make collective choices. Not every paradox has a fix. Some are just part of how systems work. Understanding them helps us use those systems more wisely. There's a strange thing that happens when people have to make decisions. The more choices we have, the harder it becomes to choose. That's the paradox. On the surface, having options looks like freedom. You aren't locked into one path. You get to choose what fits you. But when the options pile up, the weight of making the right decision grows heavier. The pressure to get it right can paralyze you. You don't feel free. You feel stuck. Take a simple example. You walk into a coffee shop. You want a drink. That should be easy. But the menu has 30 different items. Each one comes with a list of customizations. You can pick the type of milk. You can adjust the number of espresso shots. You can ask for foam or no foam, hot or iced, sweet or unsweet. You start to overthink. What if the oat milk changes the taste in a bad way? What if you order iced and it makes you cold later? What if the sweet version is too sweet, but the unsweet is too bitter? You stand there, staring at the menu, and instead of feeling empowered, you feel stressed. And this is just coffee. Now take that same pressure and apply it to bigger decisions. Where to live, which job to take, whether to get married, whether to have kids. These aren't choices you make lightly, and the more paths you see, the more you start to doubt yourself. You fear regret. You worry that if you choose one thing, you'll miss out on something better. This is the core of the paradox. More choices were supposed to make life better. Instead, they've made it harder to move forward. Part of the reason is how we think about choice. We assume that each option needs full analysis. We feel we must weigh every detail before making a move. But decisions don't work like math problems. There isn't always one clear right answer. Often, 2 or 3 paths might lead to good outcomes. But we hold back. We wait for clarity that never comes. We don't want to pick wrong, so we don't pick at all. Consider someone choosing a career after college. They've studied a general subject, maybe psychology or economics. They have no clear calling. They could go into business, marketing, social work, research. They start looking at job postings. One role pays well but seems dull. Another sounds interesting but pays less. A third is flexible but offers no clear path forward. They talk to friends, they read forums, they second-guess every thought. A month goes by, then 2, then 3. Still no decision. What was supposed to be opportunity now feels like pressure. The more they learn, the more confused they become. This kind of paralysis grows worse in the digital world. Online, we see thousands of lives on display. Social media doesn't just show people's choices, it shows their outcomes, at least the ones they curate. Someone posts about quitting their job to travel the world. Another person shares photos from their wedding. Someone else announces they're moving to a new city. Every post becomes a small nudge. Should I be doing that too? Am I falling behind? Did I choose wrong? The mind isn't built for this. It doesn't know how to process endless comparison. Instead of making us wiser, the flood of information makes us less certain. We don't want to settle. We want to optimize. But optimization assumes perfect knowledge, and we never have that. We can't see all the consequences. We can't know how we'll feel in 5 years, but we still try. So we stall. A person deciding whether to end a relationship faces this too. They care about their partner. Things aren't awful, but something feels off. They wonder if they should leave. Then they imagine the future. They picture being single, They think about dating apps, they imagine loneliness, but they also think about freedom, about new connections, about not settling. They flip between those images like a slideshow. Some days they're sure they should stay, other days they're ready to walk, but they don't move. They live in limbo. This indecision isn't just mental, it shows up in the body. People report fatigue, headaches, anxiety. They lose sleep, they feel tight in the chest. The body knows what the mind tries to juggle. It reacts to the pressure, it pushes back, but the signals get ignored. People treat it as stress they just need to power through. They think the answer will come if they think harder, but often they just end up in a loop. The paradox also plays out in group settings. Imagine a team trying to choose a direction for a project. There are 3 good ideas on the table. Each one has pros and cons. No one wants to kill any of them, so they debate. They request more data. They schedule another meeting. Weeks pass. Momentum slows. Eventually, the team picks something, not because it's clearly the best, but because they ran out of time. The process didn't help them find clarity. It helped them delay. The decision didn't feel satisfying. It felt like surrender. People often confuse thoughtful decision-making with delay. They say they're being careful. They say they need more time. But time doesn't always help. Sometimes, clarity only comes after action. You have to live inside the choice to understand it. You don't know how a job feels until you show up. You don't know how a move feels until you unpack. The mind craves certainty, but life doesn't give it. So waiting becomes a trap. One way people try to escape the trap is by outsourcing the decision. They ask friends what to do. They read advice columns. They look for signs. They try to force meaning out of small events. They hope someone or something will make the choice for them. But that only works for a while. In the end, the burden falls back on them. And if they choose based on someone else's view, they still worry they made the wrong call. Sometimes people make a choice, but stay half committed. They say yes to the job, but keep browsing listings. They move to a new city, but keep imagining the old one. They enter a relationship, but keep one foot out the door. This hedging feels safe, but it drains energy. It keeps them from fully engaging. And without engagement, they don't give the choice a real chance. Then, when things feel off, they blame the choice instead of their lack of commitment. There's no easy fix to this paradox, but awareness helps. When you feel stuck, it's worth asking if you're trying to make the perfect choice instead of a good one. It helps to notice when you're aiming for certainty you'll never get. It also helps to set limits. Give yourself a time frame. Make a list of core values. Look at the worst-case outcome and ask if you can live with it. If you can, maybe it's time to move. Most decisions aren't permanent, but we treat them like they are. That adds pressure. We think, if I choose wrong, I'll ruin everything. But few choices work that way. Life allows room for course correction. You can change jobs, you can move again, you can try, learn, and adjust, but none of that happens unless you choose. So the paradox stays with us. More freedom leads to more fear. More knowledge can create more doubt, but decisions still need to be made. And often, it's the willingness to act, not the certainty of being right, that makes the difference. The disposition effect happens when investors sell assets that have gained value while holding on to those that have lost value. This behavior goes against the basic rule of investing: cut your losses and let your winners run. Yet, many investors do the opposite. They lock in gains quickly, even when the asset might keep rising, and they hold on to losing assets, hoping they will bounce back. This leads to poor performance over time. This effect shows up in many markets and across different types of investors. It happens with retail investors, professional fund managers, and even in experimental settings with fake money. That tells us the cause is deep. It's not about knowledge or experience. It's about how people react to gains and losses. One reason people fall into this pattern is because of how we feel about losses. A loss hurts more than a gain of the same size feels good. Psychologists call this loss aversion. If you gain $100, it feels nice. If you lose $100, it feels terrible. So, when an investment drops in value, you may not want to sell because that would make the loss real. As long as you hold it, you can still believe it might go back up. You delay the pain. But when a stock goes up, you feel tempted to take the win. That feels good and complete. You lock in a profit. It makes you feel like a successful investor. But this urge to harvest gains too early often means you miss out on larger returns. Stocks that go up often keep going up, at least for a while. Selling too soon leaves money on the table. Now, let's look at how this works in a real-life situation. Suppose an investor buys 2 stocks. She puts $5,000 into each. One stock rises to $6,000. The other drops to $4,000. She needs to sell one to free up some cash. She chooses to sell the one that went up. She tells herself it's good to take a profit. She says she'll wait for the other one to recover. But what if the first stock still has strong fundamentals? What if the second one dropped because of a permanent change in the company's prospects? By selling the winner and keeping the loser, she makes a poor trade. Over time, these decisions compound. Her portfolio gets filled with underperforming assets while she misses out on growth from strong companies. The disposition effect also affects how people monitor their portfolios. Investors check the prices of their winning stocks more often than their losing ones. They talk about their wins more than their losses. This selective attention adds to the problem. If you ignore a stock that's losing value, you may miss signs that it's time to cut your losses. Or worse, you may double down and buy more of a bad investment just to average down, hoping to break even. Fund managers are not immune. Even though they handle large portfolios and get paid for performance, they still fall into this trap. Studies show that many managers are more likely to sell stocks that have gained rather than those that have dropped. This hurts returns, even at the professional level. There's also a tax angle. In many places, capital gains are taxed, and losses can be used to offset gains. From a tax standpoint, it can make sense to sell losing stocks and harvest the loss. Yet many investors do the opposite. They sell winners and hold losers, even though that increases their tax bill. This shows how strong the emotional side of investing is. Logic often loses to feelings. It's worth noting that some investors say they're holding onto a loser because they believe in the long-term value, and sometimes that's true. Not every drop in price means the stock is broken. Markets can overreact. But the key question is whether that belief is based on a sound analysis or on fear of locking in a loss. If the only reason you're not selling is because you don't want to lose money, then the disposition effect may be driving your choice. The effect also shows up in how people react to performance reports. Suppose you look at your investment app and see that your portfolio is down. You may feel discouraged and stop checking. You avoid the pain. But if the market rebounds and your balance goes up, you check more often. You want the reward of seeing a gain. This pattern shapes how you act, even if you don't realize it. Some platforms and brokers make this worse. If your app shows your gains and losses in bright red and green, or ranks your top performers, you may feel nudged to act in certain ways. Green looks good, red looks bad. The design itself encourages the disposition effect. A smart investor needs to be aware of how these nudges can lead to bias. Let's consider another case. Say you own a tech stock that dropped 40% after a bad earnings report. You believe the company still has a future, but you're not sure. You've already lost $4,000. You think, if I sell now, I lose for sure. But if I wait, maybe it comes back. That's a classic disposition moment. You're making the choice not based on future value, but based on past cost. Economists call this the sunk cost fallacy. That $4,000 is gone, whether you sell or not. The only thing that matters is what the investment is worth now and what it might be worth later. If it's still a good bet, hold. If not, sell. But many investors can't make that clean break. Breaking out of this pattern takes effort. One method is to set rules in advance. For example, decide that you'll sell any stock that drops 20% below your purchase price, unless you have clear evidence that it's still a good investment. Or decide that you won't sell any stock just because it's gone up, only if the reason you bought it no longer applies. Another method is to use third-party advice or automation. A financial advisor or algorithm can make decisions without emotion. They don't care if you're up or down. They care about expected return. The key is to focus on process, not outcome. Good investors don't always make winning trades, but they follow a system that gives them the best chance over time. The disposition effect breaks that system It causes you to act on emotion and ignore data. That leads to mistakes. Recognizing the pattern is the first step. Once you see it in yourself, you can start to fight it. Even with awareness, the effect doesn't go away. You'll still feel that tug, the urge to sell what's doing well, and the fear of admitting a loss. But you can pause and ask, am I making this choice because it makes sense or because it feels better? That small question can stop you from making a costly move. Every investor deals with these moments. A friend might brag about a stock they sold at a profit, then say they're waiting it out on one that's dropped. That's the disposition effect in plain sight. You may nod along, but take note. It's a reminder of how common this behavior is and how dangerous it can be if left unchecked. You are offered a bet on drawing a colored ball from an urn. The urn contains 90 balls in total. You are told that 30 of them are red. The rest, 60 balls, are either black or yellow, but you aren't told how many of each. Now, consider two choices. In the first choice, you can bet on drawing a red ball and win $100 if you're right. In the second choice, you can bet on drawing a black ball and win the same amount if correct. Most people choose to bet on red. That makes sense. You know there are 30 red balls, so your chances are clear. But with the black ball, you don't know if there are 0 or 60 of them. You lack information. Now, a second set of choices. You can bet on drawing either a red or yellow ball, or you can bet on drawing either a black or yellow ball. Most people now prefer to bet on black or yellow. That might seem strange at first. In the first round, you preferred red to black. In this round, you're choosing black or yellow over red or yellow. That means your choices are inconsistent. And yet, this behavior is common. This is the Ellsberg paradox. It shows how people respond differently to known risks versus unknown risks. The known risk, betting on red, is more appealing than the unknown one, betting on black. But when the same ambiguity is present in both options, people shift their preference again. This behavior breaks the rules of expected utility theory, which assumes people weigh outcomes using consistent probabilities. In economics and decision theory, expected utility theory tries to explain how rational people make choices under uncertainty. The theory says that if you assign probabilities to outcomes and have a consistent set of preferences, you will always choose the option with the highest expected utility. But in the Ellsberg paradox, people's preferences shift depending on how the information is framed, even when the underlying probabilities don't change. The key idea in the paradox is ambiguity. Ambiguity is not the same as risk. With risk, the odds are known. With ambiguity, the odds are unclear. People are generally ambiguity averse, meaning they prefer known risks to unknown ones. That's why they choose the red ball bet over the black one. They have no clue how many black balls are in the urn, and that uncertainty feels worse than the clear chance of 1 in 3 when choosing red. Let's look at another example. Imagine a second urn, also with 90 balls. This time, you are told nothing about the composition of the balls, not even how many are red. You are asked to bet on red again. Most people will refuse, or at least hesitate. Without any information at all, they feel lost. They can't judge the chance of winning. Now imagine someone else offers you a bet from the first urn again, where at least you know there are 30 red balls. Most people will prefer that first urn. They choose partial knowledge over total ignorance. This aversion to ambiguity shows up in real life. Consider investing. Suppose you are choosing between a US company and a foreign one. You know how US markets work, how their companies report earnings, and what regulations they follow. With the foreign company, you know less. Even if both stocks have similar expected returns, investors often choose the US one. They avoid the foreign stock, not because it's riskier, but because it's more ambiguous. The Ellsberg paradox challenges the idea that people make decisions purely by calculating odds and outcomes. It suggests people value certainty and shy away from missing information. That's not always irrational. In real life, ambiguity can signal hidden risks. When we lack data, we might assume the worst. This behavior may have evolved for good reasons. But it also means people often pass up opportunities that are statistically favorable simply because they feel uneasy. Some economists have tried to adjust for this behavior. One approach is to modify utility theory to account for ambiguity aversion. These newer models allow for different weights on known and unknown probabilities. Instead of treating all uncertainty the same, they give a kind of penalty to ambiguous options. This helps explain why someone might pick a lower expected value that feels more certain. A famous thought experiment helps to explain how deeply this aversion runs. Imagine 3 bets. In the first bet, you win $100 if a red ball is drawn. In the second, you win $100 if a black ball is drawn. In the third, you win $100 if either a red or black ball is drawn. Again, you know there are 30 red balls and 60 balls that are either black or yellow. If you pick the first bet, it's because you trust the 1 in 3 odds. If you avoid the second, it's because you don't trust the unknown number of black balls. But if you also avoid the third bet, where at least one color's odds are uncertain, then you're again showing aversion to ambiguity. Even when the third bet may give you the best shot, you hesitate. Ellsberg's work showed that many people display this bias. It's not a rare quirk, it's widespread. It reveals a deep gap between how humans would actually behave and how classical economic theory assumes they behave. Ellsberg's experiments were simple, but their impact was big. They opened the door for a field of study now called behavioral economics, which looks at how real people, with real emotions and limits, make decisions. The paradox also raises questions about fairness and trust. Imagine 2 job offers. One gives a fixed salary and benefits clearly written out. The other offers variable pay based on company performance, but doesn't show past data or performance metrics. Even if the second job might pay more, many will choose the first. It feels safer, not just financially, but emotionally. The lack of transparency in the second offer creates ambiguity. People feel exposed. In law, ambiguity also matters. Suppose a law has unclear language. Judges and lawyers might interpret it in different ways. The lack of clarity can lead to hesitation, cautious decisions, or even biased ones. People will try to avoid outcomes where rules are open to interpretation. They prefer solid ground. In this way, the Ellsberg paradox speaks not only to individual decisions, but to systems and policies that rely on how people respond to uncertainty. Some might say people should learn to think like expected utility theory says they should, that we should learn to ignore ambiguity and just focus on what the math tells us. But that's hard. The discomfort from ambiguity is emotional, not just logical. It feels different to make a decision when you're in the dark. Even if the numbers are fine, the feeling isn't. Ellsberg's idea, though simple, cuts through assumptions that have long guided economic thought. People don't always act based on pure calculation. They act based on how much they know and how much they don't know. And often, what they don't know shapes their choices more than anything else. 2 people are part of a simple deal. Each person places an envelope on the table. Inside each envelope is a sum of money. One envelope holds more than the other. The amounts are not known to the players. One player opens their envelope and sees the amount. They now have a choice. They can keep their envelope, or they can switch and take the other one. Here's the twist. The player reasons like this. Suppose my envelope contains $10. The other envelope could have $5 or $20. If I have the smaller amount, then the other envelope has twice as much. If I have the larger amount, then the other one has half as much. So I think there's a 50% chance the other envelope has $5 and a 50% chance it has $20. Now I calculate the expected value. That's 0.5 times $5 plus 0.5 times $20. That's $2.50 plus $10, which equals $12.50. That's more than the $10 I have. So it seems like switching is the better choice. This is where the paradox begins. You can apply that same logic no matter what number is in the envelope. If you see $50, you'll say, the other envelope has $25 or $100, and the expected value is $62.50. Again, switching looks better. But this can't be right. You can't always gain by switching. The other envelope doesn't change just because you switch. You're not playing against a faulty machine. You're just picking between 2 fixed amounts. If the logic says you should always switch, then you'll keep going back and forth. It becomes a loop. But something must be wrong with the reasoning. Let's look closer at the logic. It assumes that the probability of getting the larger or smaller amount is 50 to 50. But is that true? Suppose the person who set up the envelopes used a specific rule. Maybe they picked a number, then either halved it or doubled it. But how did they pick the original number? That's important. If they chose a number from a known range, say between $10 and $100, then not every amount can be doubled or halved without leaving that range. If you see $10, the smaller amount, there's no $5 in the range, so the assumption breaks down. Or maybe they used a probability distribution to pick the first number. If that distribution gives more weight to small numbers, then the odds of seeing a small number are higher. That changes the likelihood that your envelope contains the smaller or larger amount. The 50-50 assumption doesn't hold anymore. The key problem is using expected value without a proper prior. You can't say the chance of the other envelope being higher or lower is equal unless you know how the amounts were picked. In most real situations, you don't have that information. The probabilities are not symmetrical. Without that, the expected value calculation isn't reliable. To make this clearer, imagine a setup. The host picks $10, then makes the second envelope by doubling it. Now there are envelopes with $10 and $20. If you see $10, you know the other has $20. If you see $20, you know the other has $10. Now you switch only if you see $10. That makes sense. But in this setup, the probabilities are not 50-50. The $10 envelope always goes with $20. So the player who sees $10 is always better off switching, and the player who sees $20 should keep their envelope. No paradox there. But that depends on knowing how the values were assigned. Without that knowledge, any reasoning based on guessing probabilities leads to confusion. Let's take another scenario. The host writes down two values, $100 and $200. He flips a coin to decide which one to give you. You open it and see $100. You wonder if the other envelope has $50 or $200. But here, the other envelope definitely has $200. There is no $50 in this game. Your mental model doesn't match the game structure. You misjudge the possible values. Your expected value calculation includes a number that can't exist. That throws off your decision. This shows the real source of the paradox. It's not that switching is always better. It's that your estimate is based on the wrong set of possibilities. You're treating an unknown value as if it could be anything with equal chance of being double or half. That's not grounded in the actual method used to set up the envelopes. If you go back to the earlier calculation, say you see $10 and think there's a 50% chance the other envelope has $5 or $20, that means you believe there's a 50% chance your envelope contains the larger amount. But that can't be independent of the value you see. If you see a very small number, like $1, then chances are it's the smaller one. If you see a very large number, like $10,000, maybe it's more likely to be the larger one. The value itself gives you a clue, but using that clue requires knowing the distribution of possible amounts. Without it, you're guessing. Now consider this. Suppose the host picks an amount using a normal distribution centered at $100. That means most numbers will be close to $100, but occasionally much smaller or larger amounts appear. He then randomly decides whether to double or halve it. This changes the game. If you open the envelope and see $30, you can use the distribution to estimate whether it's more likely that the starting number was $15 or $60. That tells you how likely the other envelope is to be larger or smaller. But this approach needs the actual distribution. You need to use Bayesian reasoning. That's more complex, and it doesn't lead to the same neat 50-50 assumption. The paradox teaches a broader lesson. You can't rely on expected value alone unless you understand the full setup. A calculation is only as good as the assumptions behind it. If the setup is unclear or the probabilities are guessed, then the numbers you get are not trustworthy. This is why the paradox seems persuasive at first. It uses a clean logic, simple math, and an appealing idea, but the simplicity hides the flaw. It pretends the game works one way when it might work another. You get caught in a loop because the logic is disconnected from reality. You can think of it like this. Suppose you're walking down a path and see two roads. One looks shorter, but you don't know where they lead. Choosing based on appearance alone might send you in circles. You need a map, not just guesses. In the envelope case, that map is the method used to choose the amounts. Without it, the whole decision process becomes unstable. Every choice to switch leads to the same result, more uncertainty. You can't resolve it without stepping outside the assumptions and looking at how the game was built. This is why the paradox holds its shape even after you see its flaw. It's not the math that's wrong, it's the context that's missing. You can't judge the value of switching without knowing the structure behind the envelopes. Until you have that, the best move is to recognize what you don't know. Fenno's paradox is a simple idea that shows up in a surprising place: how people view Congress. It goes like this. Most Americans say they don't like Congress. They think it's full of gridlock, noise, and people who talk more than they act. At the same time, many Americans say they like their own representative. They think their rep listens, works hard, and fights for them. This difference in opinion, disliking the group but liking the individual, is the paradox. The name comes from Richard Fenno, a political scientist. He spent a lot of time watching members of Congress in their districts. He followed them, took notes, and tried to understand what made them successful. He wanted to know how they stayed in office, why voters kept sending them back, even when people were frustrated with Washington. One of Fenno's big insights was about trust. Voters tend to trust the people they meet. They might not trust the system or the far-off noise of national politics, but they often trust someone they've seen in person, shaking hands at the local fair or listening at a town hall meeting. A representative can build a personal connection. They can show up at events, call voters by name, and speak directly about local issues. That kind of contact matters more than big national debates for a lot of people. Fenno also saw that representatives know this. When they go home to their districts, they act differently than when they're in Washington. In DC, they might take part in loud arguments or vote along party lines. But at home, they often speak in a softer voice. They talk about helping veterans, getting funding for roads or schools, or meeting with small business owners. They try to come off as hard workers focused on practical things. They know voters want someone who gets results. This creates a kind of split identity. A member of Congress can be part of the big, messy machine of national politics and still be seen as a steady, helpful figure back home. That's the core of the paradox. Congress as a whole looks like a problem. Individual members often look like the solution. It helps to think about how people form opinions. Most of us don't watch floor debates. We don't read the full text of bills. We catch snippets from the news or hear from friends. National coverage focuses on fights, scandals, or dysfunction. Local coverage, when it exists, focuses on what the local member is doing: grants secured, meetings held, letters sent. It's not hard to see why one image would look worse than the other. Let's say you live in a district where your representative shows up often. You've seen them speak at your kid's school or cut the ribbon on a new bridge. You may not agree with them on every issue, but you feel they're trying. You might not feel the same way about Congress as an idea. That's a big group of people, many of whom you've never seen or heard from directly. It's easy to blame them for things not working. This personal touch has real value. Representatives often craft a home style, a term Fenno used to describe how they present themselves to constituents. This includes how they dress, how they speak, and who they meet with. One member might wear jeans and sit on hay bales at county fairs. Another might give polished speeches at Rotary clubs. Each choice helps shape how voters see them. A strong home style can protect a representative from national tides. Even in years when their party does poorly overall, they can survive because people in their district feel loyal. It's not just about politics. It's about personal contact and familiarity. It's the same reason someone might trust their doctor, but not the healthcare system. Or like their kid's teacher, but complain about public schools. This makes Congress hard to fix. When people are mad at the institution, but happy with their own member, they're less likely to vote for change. They send the same people back, hoping those individuals will push the system to work better. But when most members win re-election, the overall shape of Congress doesn't change much. Gridlock continues, and public frustration grows. The paradox feeds itself. Campaign finance plays a role too. Incumbents raise more money. They know more donors, and they have more visibility. They can send newsletters, make media appearances, and hold events that keep their name in the public eye. New challengers have to work harder to be seen or heard. And if voters already like their current rep, there's little reason to switch. Gerrymandering adds another layer. In many districts, the political lines are drawn in ways that make one party dominant. That means the real contest isn't between two parties in November, it's in the primary months before. And in primaries, the most active voters tend to be the most ideological. That pushes members to appeal to their base, even if it makes them less likely to compromise in Congress. But again, at home, they may sound more balanced or practical. They know how to adjust their message for each setting. The paradox also affects how members act in office. If they know voters mostly care about local results, they may spend more time securing grants or cutting red tape than working on national legislation. It's not that they don't care about big issues, but they know what wins votes. If their district gets a new post office or a cleaned-up riverfront, that's something they can point to. They can say, "I did this." It's harder to say that about a bill that stalled in committee or died in the Senate. Some members even run against Congress while being part of it. They say things like, "Washington is broken, but I'm here to fight for you." That framing helps separate themselves from the group. It tells voters, "I'm not one of them, I'm one of you." And it works because of the gap between national and local perception. Media shifts have made this more intense. National outlets now reach into local spaces through cable and the internet, but local coverage of politics has shrunk. Many newspapers have fewer reporters. Some towns have no local political reporting at all. That means people hear more about the dysfunction in Congress and less about what their representative is doing day to day. Yet even with less local news, direct contact still matters. Town halls, social media posts, and newsletters let members keep in touch and shape their image. Fenno's paradox doesn't mean voters are wrong. It just shows how context shapes perception. When you know someone, or feel like you do, you judge them differently. You cut them more slack. You assume they're trying. But when you look at a group from the outside, it's easier to blame or doubt them. That's not just true in politics, it's human nature. But in Congress, it shapes everything from elections to how laws get made. This dynamic isn't new. Fenno saw it in the 1970s, and it's still true today. Members know how to work their districts. They know how to build relationships and keep their jobs. Voters want results, but they also want someone they feel they know. That mix of personal trust and institutional frustration is what keeps the paradox alive. Fredkin's paradox is about choice. It says that the closer two options are in value, the harder it is to choose between them. At first, this sounds strange. You might think that if two things are almost the same, it shouldn't matter which one you pick. But the paradox says the opposite. When the difference between two options is small, we spend more time deciding. That doesn't sound rational. If the choice doesn't matter much, why do we struggle? Let's say you are picking between two job offers. One pays $101,000 a year, the other pays $100,000. They are in similar cities, offer the same benefits, and give you similar roles. You spend days thinking about the difference. You talk to friends, you make pros and cons lists. You ask yourself what that extra $1,000 really means. This is Fredkin's paradox in action. The more alike the choices, the harder it feels to make the call. This goes against how we think decisions should work. You might assume hard choices come from big differences. A choice between a job in Paris and one in Kansas City feels big because the lifestyle shift is large. You'd think a choice between two similar jobs would be quick. But that's not always true. When two options are very close, we start to look harder for any small edge. That edge becomes the focus. It grows in importance, even if it's minor. The paradox is named after Edward Fredkin, a physicist and computer scientist. He noticed how people struggle with decisions that seem minor. His insight was that we use effort to decide when it seems like there's something important at stake. But if the options are almost the same, the difference isn't important. So we end up wasting time trying to solve a problem that doesn't matter much. Think of someone in a grocery store. They're deciding between two brands of canned tomatoes. Both cost the same. Both look about equal. One has a label that says vine ripened, the other says no added salt. The shopper stands there frozen. Minutes pass. They try to figure out which label matters more. But in the end, either can of tomatoes will work fine in their pasta sauce. Still, the decision feels hard. That's Fredkin's paradox. You see it with students too. A student finishes an essay and wonders if they should use the word important or essential. They go back and forth. They look up definitions. They ask someone else. They consider the tone. They ask if essential sounds too strong. But in the larger context, it probably doesn't make a big difference. Still, it takes them 10 minutes to decide. That's Fredkin's paradox again. This happens because we think that if a choice is hard, it must be important. We often assume that effort equals value. So when we can't decide, we believe the outcome must matter. But Fredkin pointed out that it's the other way around. If two things are hard to choose between, that might mean the choice doesn't matter much. The more equal the options, the less impact your choice will likely have. That's the twist. Let's bring it into the workplace. Imagine a hiring manager choosing between two job candidates. Both have similar experience, education, and references. The manager spends hours reviewing interviews, rereading resumes, and calling contacts. It feels like a tough decision, but maybe that's because it doesn't matter much which person they pick. Either would do well in the role. The time spent trying to find a clear winner might not be useful. But the manager feels pressure. They don't want to make a mistake. They want to feel confident, so they dig deeper even when there may be no real answer to find. This is also common in tech product decisions. A team is deciding between two cloud providers. Both meet their needs. Both have similar pricing. The team debates for weeks. They make comparison charts. They look for reviews. They test small features. The more equal the options seem, the more intense the effort becomes. They don't want to miss something. But maybe the time spent deciding is a bigger cost than picking one and moving forward. Fredkin's paradox doesn't mean you should stop thinking about choices. It doesn't say that small decisions don't matter at all. It points out a pattern. When the choice is close, the impact of the decision is probably small too. Yet we tend to act like close calls are high stakes. That leads to decision paralysis. We hesitate. We search for more data. We try to make the perfect choice, but there may be no perfect choice. Just two good ones. There's also a cognitive part to this. Our brains want to optimize. We like the idea that we can always find the best option. So even if two options are very similar, we feel like we should find a reason to prefer one. We scan for clues. We build arguments. We worry about regret. We imagine looking back and thinking we should have gone the other way. That fear of future regret can trap us in analysis. Take another example, buying a phone. Two models have the same features. One has a slightly better camera, the other has slightly better battery life. You read review after review, you ask friends, you try both in the store. Days go by, but a year from now you probably won't remember the difference. Either phone would work. Still, the choice feels hard in the moment. Fredkin's paradox shows up when we want to feel in control. Making a decision gives us a sense of agency, but we don't want to feel like we made a bad call. So when options are close, we stall. We think the hard part is figuring out which one is better. But maybe the hard part is accepting that the choice just doesn't matter much. In military planning, Fredkin's paradox can lead to delays. A commander might have two possible routes for a mission. Both carry similar risk. Both offer similar timing. But the team spends too long deciding. They hope to find some advantage that makes one clearly better. Meanwhile, time is lost. Conditions change. Sometimes it's better to pick quickly and move than to search for perfect certainty. This also applies in personal life. Think about relationships. Someone might date two people at different times and find both compatible. Then they meet both again, years later, and can't decide who to pursue. They analyze every interaction. They ask friends for input. But if the choice feels hard, maybe it's because both options would be fine. That doesn't mean it's easy, but it might mean the impact won't be as big as they fear. Fredkin's paradox offers a simple but powerful insight. When you struggle to choose between two things that seem equal, you're probably overthinking. You feel stuck not because the stakes are high, but because they're low. The decision feels weighty, but the impact might not be. That doesn't make you irrational, it makes you human. But knowing the pattern helps. When you notice the paradox, you can step back and ask, if it's this close, does it really matter which I pick? Often the answer is no. The green paradox is simple but hard to fix. It happens when we try to cut carbon emissions, but instead we make things worse. The idea comes from a real problem. Fossil fuel owners know their resources will lose value if the world moves to clean energy. So when governments announce future restrictions or taxes, owners act fast. They sell more oil, coal, and gas now before rules hit their profits. This causes emissions to go up in the short term, not down. The plan to help the planet backfires. Imagine a coal company that hears a carbon tax will start in 5 years. It owns reserves that are still in the ground. Once the tax hits, that coal becomes less valuable. Demand will drop, prices will fall, and profits will shrink. So what does the company do? It speeds up production. It sells as much coal as possible before the tax begins. The same goes for oil and gas producers. If they think regulations or bans are coming, they flood the market early. The result? Emissions rise before they fall. This is the paradox. This isn't just theory. We've seen it happen. In 2007, economists Hans-Werner Sinn and others studied oil markets and energy policy. They noticed that when governments announced future clean energy rules, fossil fuel prices sometimes dropped. Investors took this as a sign. Producers were pumping more oil to sell before restrictions came into place. Even announcements without action caused early extraction. This leads to a tough problem for policymakers. How do you make fossil fuel extraction slow down now, not just later? If you tell the world you're phasing out oil by 2040 but do nothing right now, you may trigger a rush to drill and burn. That rush increases emissions in the near term, which is the worst time for it. Climate models show that front-loaded emissions do the most damage. Carbon dioxide stays in the atmosphere for hundreds of years. Early pollution locks in warming. One fix might seem obvious: ban fossil fuels right away. But that's not practical. The world still runs on oil, gas, and coal. In many countries, clean energy can't yet meet demand. Turn off the fossil fuels too fast, and people lose heat, power, and jobs. Economies slow down. Voters get angry. Governments backtrack. We've seen this too. France tried a sharp fuel tax in 2018. Protests broke out. The plan failed. It's hard to push people off fossil fuels if there's no safety net. Another approach is to tax carbon now, not later. If you want to reduce emissions today, raise the cost of polluting today. A high carbon tax makes burning oil less attractive now, not just in the future. But this is hard to pass politically. Many voters see it as a new burden. Businesses argue it will hurt the economy. Poor households suffer most, as energy takes a larger share of their budget. There's also the issue of global coordination. If one country cuts emissions but others do not, the fuel gets sold elsewhere. This is called carbon leakage. Suppose the US taxes carbon and coal becomes expensive. Companies might just sell the coal to Asia instead. The planet still warms, and US industry loses ground. Without a global plan, local action may not be enough. Some experts say the answer is to limit supply directly. That means governments should keep fossil fuels in the ground. They can do this by buying reserves and leaving them untouched. They can also restrict permits for drilling and mining. If the fuel can't be extracted, it can't be burned. This avoids the paradox, but it's expensive. Buying fossil fuel assets means paying market value for resources you'll never use. It's politically risky, and again, it only works if done on a large scale. One country acting alone won't move the needle. Let's look at a case. Norway is a rich country with large oil reserves. It also wants to be a climate leader. So far, it's cut emissions at home, but it still exports oil. The oil it sells gets burned somewhere else, adding to global emissions. Norway benefits financially, while others bear the climate cost. If Norway stopped drilling, it would lose revenue, but global emissions might fall. However, that would only happen if other producers didn't make up the gap. In practice, Saudi Arabia or Russia might just pump more. Again, we see the paradox. This brings us to a core truth. Fossil fuel markets are global. If you limit supply in one place, prices rise. That rise draws out more supply elsewhere. It also hurts consumers. Poor countries that rely on cheap fuel suffer most. Their development slows. So climate policy must be fair, not just green. Otherwise, it fails. There are ways to soften the green paradox. One method is a global carbon tax, or a minimum carbon price agreed by many countries. This raises costs everywhere, reducing the chance that one country's effort gets undone by another's inaction. Another tool is a carbon border adjustment. This puts tariffs on imports from countries that don't tax carbon. It protects local industry and pushes others to act. Governments can also change investor expectations. If they act decisively and show clear, firm steps, like canceling subsidies, ending new drilling licenses, and supporting clean energy, they shift market behavior. Fossil fuel producers may then see the writing on the wall. They won't just rush to extract more. They'll plan for decline. That reduces the paradox effect. Public ownership plays a role too. If governments own oil companies or mines, they can slow production by choice. They don't have to chase profit. They can manage decline in a controlled way. This avoids market panic. It also protects workers. Transition plans become possible. Communities that rely on fossil jobs get time and support to shift to new industries. We also need better messaging. When leaders talk about banning fossil fuels, they must also show what replaces them. That means investing in clean power, electric transport, and home insulation. It means building the future before tearing down the past. If people see a path forward, they're more likely to support change. If they only see sacrifice, they resist. The green paradox doesn't mean we give up. It means we plan smarter. Announcing distant climate goals without near-term action can do harm. We must act now, not just promise to act later. And when we act, we must think about how markets respond. If we get the response wrong, we move backward. This is the hard edge of climate policy. It's not just about good intentions. It's about timing, design, and incentives. It's about understanding how markets move and how people react. The green paradox teaches us that delay has a price. It shows that policy must be both urgent and careful. We need to phase out fossil fuels in a way that doesn't trigger a last-minute dash to burn them all. That takes coordination, courage, and clarity. The paradox will remain until we solve that puzzle. The hard-easy effect is a pattern in how people judge their own performance. When tasks are hard, people tend to think they did better than they actually did. When tasks are easy, they tend to think they did worse. This effect shows up in many areas: sports, academics, and even everyday decision-making. It's a bias in how we estimate our abilities, and it can quietly shape how we learn, work, and improve. Imagine someone takes a very difficult quiz on an obscure topic, like 17th century naval history. After finishing, they say, "I think I got most of it right." In reality, they scored 30%. They overestimated their performance. Now imagine someone else takes a basic vocabulary test. They say, "I think I missed a few." They actually scored 95%. They underestimated how well they did. That's the hard-easy effect at work. Hard tasks make us think we did better than we did. Easy tasks make us think we did worse. This effect is not random. It comes from how we process feedback and confidence. When something feels hard, we struggle to judge how much we really know. We might latch on to the few parts we recognized and assume we did fine. The struggle itself makes success feel plausible because we worked hard. But working hard doesn't mean we got it right. It just means it took effort. Easy tasks are different. When something feels too simple, we start to doubt ourselves. If it was easy for us, we assume it was easy for everyone. We think, maybe I missed something, or that felt too simple to be right. This leads to underconfidence. We second-guess our answers, even when we're right. We don't trust success when it comes without strain. Psychologists first noticed this effect while studying confidence in decision-making. They found a consistent pattern. For questions with a low rate of correct answers, people were too confident. For questions with a high rate of correct answers, they were not confident enough. They saw this over and over across different kinds of tasks: trivia questions, visual detection, memory tests. The pattern held steady. Confidence didn't match accuracy. It tilted based on how hard the task was. This matters because it affects how people learn and grow. When someone overestimates their performance on a hard task, they may not see the need to improve. They think they did fine, so they move on. They miss chances to learn. When someone underestimates their performance on an easy task, they may avoid similar tasks in the future. They might think they aren't good enough, even though they are. The bias can steer us away from helpful practice and feedback. In school, this can shape how students respond to different subjects. A student might take a tough math test and walk away feeling confident. Their actual score might be low, but they don't expect that. They feel good because they worked hard. Without feedback, they may think they understand the material when they don't. Another student might take a spelling quiz, get nearly every word right, and still feel unsure. They don't trust their success because it felt too easy. They might think it was a fluke. In workplaces, this shows up in how people assess their own work or decisions. Someone might take on a hard project, struggle through it, and feel proud. They may believe they nailed it because it was so hard, but their boss sees flaws they missed. The difficulty gave them a false sense of success. Another person might complete a simple report quickly and feel unsure. They think, that can't be all, and worry they missed something. They did fine, but they don't believe it. The effect also appears in how people train or practice skills. An athlete learning a new routine might overrate their performance if the moves are difficult. The effort tricks them into thinking they're better than they are. A musician playing an easy piece might underrate their performance, even if it was flawless. They don't trust their ease with it. The level of effort skews the judgment. One reason this happens is that people often use effort as a cue for success. We think if it was hard and I tried my best, I must have done well. This is not always true. Effort can mean struggle, not success. But we don't always separate the two. We also assume that tasks that feel easy are suspicious. We believe real success should feel like a challenge. When it doesn't, we doubt it. We mix up effort with outcome. Another reason is that we have limited access to objective feedback. Without clear answers or results, we rely on our internal sense of how it went. That sense is shaped by how the task felt. A hard task feels like a mountain, and reaching the end feels like a win. An easy task feels flat, and the end doesn't feel earned. These feelings influence our judgments more than we realize. The hard-easy effect can affect group settings too. In meetings or teams, people may speak more confidently about complex topics, even when they're not right. The difficulty makes them feel like they've mastered something deep. Others may stay quiet about simple insights, thinking they must be obvious or unimportant. Valuable input gets missed because it came too easily. The bias skews not just individual judgment, but group dynamics. This effect can also reinforce inequalities. People who take on harder challenges might be seen as more capable, even if they're not doing better. They appear confident and invested. People who do simple tasks well might be overlooked, especially if they seem unsure. Their skill doesn't get recognized because they don't show strong confidence. The effect makes it easy to confuse effort with competence. There are ways to push back against the hard-easy effect, but they take practice. One is to seek clear feedback. Results and scores can help correct the mismatch between confidence and accuracy. Another is to notice the role of effort in shaping judgments. Just because something felt hard doesn't mean it went well. Just because something felt easy doesn't mean it went poorly. Taking a step back and separating those can help. Training in metacognition, the ability to think about one's thinking, can also help. People can learn to adjust their confidence based on past patterns, not just current feelings. If someone sees that they often overrate their performance on hard tasks, they can start to question that feeling. If they tend to underrate easy successes, they can start to recognize those patterns and adjust. It's not about perfect judgment. It's about knowing when to doubt your first instinct. In testing environments, researchers sometimes design confidence scales alongside accuracy questions. This helps people calibrate their self-assessment over time. The idea is to help people close the gap between how they feel and how they perform. It's not easy. The bias is strong, but with repeated feedback, people can get better at judging themselves. Even small moments show the effect. Think of a person solving a crossword puzzle. They take on a hard Saturday grid, finish half of it, and feel like a genius. They try a Monday puzzle, finish it in minutes, and feel like it was too easy to count. But the Monday puzzle was a clean win. The Saturday one was incomplete. Their confidence doesn't line up with the result. The hard, easy effect hides the truth behind how it felt. This kind of misjudgment won't always cause big problems, but over time it adds up. It shapes what we try, how we reflect, and whether we grow. It's one of those quiet mental habits that can steer us without us even noticing. Once you see it, you start to wonder where else it's been hiding. The inventor's paradox shows up in places you might not expect. It says that solving a general problem is often easier than solving a specific one. That might sound backward. Most people think that the more narrow the question, the simpler it should be to answer. But that's not always the case, especially when you're trying to build or discover something new. Imagine you're writing a computer program to sort a list of 5 names. You could sit down and figure out how to compare those 5 names, swap them around, and eventually get them in alphabetical order. But your code would only work for those 5 names. If someone gives you 6 names, or 10, or 100, your solution falls apart. You'd have to write new code every time. Instead, if you take a step back and solve the problem of how to sort any list of names, no matter how long, you actually get a more powerful and, surprisingly, often a simpler solution. You only have to solve the problem once, and it works everywhere. This kind of thing happens a lot in math. One story people tell involves Carl Friedrich Gauss. When he was a kid, his teacher told the class to add up all the numbers from 1 to 100. The teacher thought it would keep them busy, but Gauss didn't add them one by one. He saw a pattern. He realized that 1 plus 100 is 101, 2 plus 99 is also 101, and so on. He figured out you could pair the numbers up like that. There are 50 pairs, each adding to 101, so the answer is 50 times 101, which is 5050. He didn't solve just that problem. He solved the general problem of adding the numbers from 1 to n. His approach works no matter what number you end on. That's what the inventor's paradox is about. If you try to solve a narrow problem, you might miss the bigger picture. You end up designing something that only works in one case. But if you aim for the more general version, you often end up with a cleaner, more elegant solution that covers more ground. Let's say you're building a chair for someone who weighs exactly 150 pounds and is 5 feet 10 inches tall. You measure everything to fit that person. The height of the seat, the angle of the backrest, the position of the armrests. It's all perfect. But now imagine someone heavier sits in it, or someone shorter. Your chair may not work for them. If you had instead asked, how can I design a chair that works for a wide range of people? You might have made something adjustable, or something shaped in a way that naturally fits many body types. You would have ended up with a better chair, even for the original person. This paradox comes up in software all the time. A team might be asked to build a feature for one client. They think, okay, we'll just write the code that handles this exact case. But that code becomes hard to maintain. Later, when another client asks for something similar, the team realizes they have to rewrite the whole thing. If they had stepped back and asked, what's the general pattern here? They might have built a flexible system from the start. The extra effort early on saves time in the long run. It's not just about saving time. Thinking generally often makes the problem easier to reason about. When you aim for a specific case, your brain has to juggle every tiny detail. You get lost in exceptions and edge cases. But when you step back and look at the general case, patterns appear. You can make rules that cover everything at once. Your solution becomes simpler, even if it handles more situations. Picture someone trying to tile a bathroom floor. They're working around weird corners and odd angles. They cut each tile to fit just right. It takes forever. Now think about someone laying tile in a square room. The job is faster because the pattern repeats. But here's the thing. If you designed a tile pattern that could handle any room shape, maybe by using smaller tiles that fit together like a puzzle, you wouldn't need to cut so much. The general solution reduces the amount of work, even though it seems like it should be harder. There's a deeper reason why this happens. Specific problems come with constraints. They tie your hands. They force you to work in a narrow box. General problems don't have those same limits. You have more freedom to explore different ideas. That freedom can lead to better solutions. In science, this shows up all the time. Newton didn't try to explain why apples fall from trees. He tried to explain why anything falls and why the moon stays in orbit. By asking the general question, he found a single law, gravity, that explains both. If he had only asked about apples, he might have missed the connection. The same thing happens in design. A graphic designer might be asked to create a poster for one event. If they make a layout that only works with those exact words and images, it's fragile. But if they design a system, a set of styles, rules, and proportions, then they can reuse it for future posters, even with different content. The system makes the work easier, not harder. This doesn't mean you should always go big. There are times when the specific case really is all you need, but when you're stuck, or when the solution feels too messy, it's often because you're thinking too small. Zooming out can help you spot the pattern. A good example of this in practice is in recipe development. Let's say someone is trying to make the perfect pancake for their altitude, their pan, and their ingredients. They keep adjusting the amounts. It's frustrating, but if they learn the general rules of how ingredients behave, how eggs bind, how baking powder creates rise, how sugar affects browning, they can apply that knowledge to pancakes, waffles, cakes, or anything else. They stop guessing and start understanding. Even in writing, this idea applies. If you're trying to write the perfect email to one person, you might agonize over every word. But if you write something that works for a group, a clear, honest message, you might find it lands better for everyone, including the one person you had in mind. The inventor's paradox can feel wrong at first. Our instinct is to start small, solve one thing, then grow from there. But often, that small thing is tangled and hard to solve. The bigger, more general problem gives us more tools and more insight. It lets us create something that lasts. That's why inventors, real ones, the kind who build things, often don't work on the narrow request in front of them. They try to understand the broader problem. They build general solutions that apply in many places, and in doing so, they often solve the original problem better than if they had focused only on that. Kavka's toxin puzzle is a thought experiment about intention and motivation. It tests whether you can truly intend to do something when there's no reason to do it once the reward is secured. The scenario is simple, but it pulls apart how we think about choice, commitment, and belief in action. Here's how it goes. A billionaire offers you a deal. If, by midnight tonight, you form the intention to drink a toxin tomorrow, they'll wire $1 million to your account. You don't need to actually drink it. The money is yours just for forming the intention. The toxin will make you sick for a day, but won't cause lasting harm. If you drink it, you'll feel miserable for 24 hours. The catch is this: the billionaire can tell if you really intend to drink the toxin. They're not mind reading, but they have some way, say brain scans or behavior observation, that lets them reliably detect sincere intentions. Here's the problem. When midnight comes, if you've really formed the intention to drink the toxin, you get the money. But once you have the money, there's no reason left to drink it. You've already been paid. And since drinking the toxin gives you no benefit, it seems irrational to go through with it. So the question is, can you really intend to do something you know you'll have no reason to do once the reward is secured? To work through it, it helps to think about what it means to intend something. Intending isn't just saying you'll do something, it's a mental commitment. When you intend to do X, you usually plan for it, prepare for it, and feel that it's the action you'll take. It's tied to your beliefs and your reasons. Most of the time, you intend something because you believe it will help you reach a goal. Here, though, the reward isn't tied to the action. It's tied to the intention before the action. Once the intention is formed and the reward is given, the reason for the action disappears. That creates a split between the reason for intending and the reason for doing. You intend in order to get the money. But once you get it, drinking the toxin serves no purpose. If you're rational, you won't drink it. But if you're rational and know that, you also know, right now, that future you won't go through with it. And if you know that, then you can't honestly intend to do it. The billionaire's test will detect this. You fail. Suppose you try to game the system. You think, I'll just try to believe I'll do it. You rehearse it, you tell yourself you'll drink it, you imagine waking up tomorrow and going through with it. But somewhere inside, you know you're faking it. you don't really believe you'll do it. You're trying to form an intention, but you can't force belief like that. Your knowledge of tomorrow blocks you. It's like trying to believe there's a chair in the room when you clearly see there isn't. You can imagine it, you can say it, but you don't believe it. People sometimes compare this to New Year's resolutions. You say you'll go to the gym every day. You feel like you mean it, but part of you doubts it. That's different, though. In that case, you want to form the intention, and the reward is tied to the action. You'll be healthier. You'll feel better. There's something in it for you if you follow through. Here, the action gives you nothing. There's no long-term benefit to drinking the toxin. No one else will know. You've already got the million. So the only reason to drink it is if you still care about having meant it. Some try to make it work through self-binding. You might think, I'll drink it no matter what. I'll force myself. Maybe you set an alarm, prep the glass, leave reminders. But if you know this is all mechanical, not driven by sincere intention, it still doesn't help. The billionaire's detector picks up sincerity, not ritual. You can't cheat the intention. Others suggest trying to become the kind of person who follows through no matter what. Maybe you've trained yourself to stick to intentions just for the sake of it. But even then, the puzzle asks, is this enough? Is it possible to will yourself into a true intention when your reasons dry up the moment you succeed? Another angle is to separate belief from intention. Maybe you don't believe you'll drink it, but you still intend to. This is a tough sell. Intention usually rides on belief. If you intend to go to the store, it's because you think you will. If you believe you won't, the intention falls apart. So trying to intend what you don't believe you'll do is like trying to walk north and south at the same time. You might want to intend, but wanting isn't the same as doing. It also shows a strange gap in motivation. If you told someone you'd pay them to want to go to the dentist, they might say they want to. But it wouldn't be a real desire. Same with intention. You can say the words, feel some pressure, go through motions, but if your reasons vanish, so does the core of the intention. You might try to fool yourself. Maybe you plan to drink it and avoid thinking about the money. You focus on the toxin and decide to act as if the money never came. But deep down, you know you're not doing this for the action. You're doing it to get the money, and once that's done, your motivation dies. That knowledge leaks into your present mind. You can't hide it from yourself. The loop closes. You can't form the real intention because you know tomorrow you won't carry it out. There's also a weird time angle. Normally, your future plans guide your actions. You intend now because you see what you'll do later. But in this case, the moment you look ahead and see no action, your present intention crumbles. You're trying to build a bridge with no other side. You might build scaffolding, imagine it there, hope it holds, but when you look closely, there's nothing to land on. Think of a kid being told, pretend you'll eat broccoli tomorrow, and I'll give you ice cream now. The kid nods, maybe even tries to mean it, but unless the kid actually expects to eat the broccoli, it's just a performance. That's what Kavka's puzzle catches, the difference between performance and genuine intent. The puzzle doesn't just ask whether it's logical to drink the toxin. It asks whether it's possible to form an intention when your reasons are temporary. Most of our decisions tie intention to action through benefit. Here, the benefit comes only from holding a mental state for a moment, then dropping it. And we're just not built to do that in good faith. At least, not without conflict. Kafka's toxin puzzle shows that we can't always intend what we have no reason to do. Even if we want the reward, and even if the cost is small, we can't make ourselves believe we'll act when we know we won't. Intention depends on belief, and belief depends on reasons. Without reasons, the whole thing collapses. You get stuck in a loop where the more rational you are, the harder it is to convince yourself to follow through. The Mandarin paradox is simple to state but hard to solve. It goes like this. Imagine a person who lives in a remote village. They speak only Mandarin and have never learned any other language. One day, someone hands them a sheet of paper filled with English sentences and asks them to sort the sentences into two piles, those that are grammatically correct and those that are not. They cannot understand a single word, yet somehow they do the task perfectly. How is this possible? This paradox lives in the space between language and understanding. It's based on the idea that someone might follow rules perfectly without knowing what the words mean. This person in the village does not speak English, and yet they act as if they understand English grammar. It seems like they know something they cannot possibly know. That's the paradox. To make this clearer, think of a game. You sit in a locked room. Outside the door, people slip you symbols on pieces of paper. You look up the symbols in a big rule book. The rule book tells you what to write in response and how to send that paper back through the door. You follow the rules exactly. You do not know what the symbols mean. They could be questions, jokes, or insults. You do not understand the language at all. You just manipulate symbols. Yet to the person outside the door, it looks like you are having a real conversation in their language. This scenario is not imaginary. It is a version of what's called the Chinese room argument, made famous by the philosopher John Searle. The Mandarin paradox is just a twist. Instead of English and a rule book, the person in the story is a native Mandarin speaker dealing with English. But the problem stays the same. Can someone appear to understand a language without understanding it at all? We usually think of understanding as something inside the mind. When you hear a sentence, you don't just hear the words. You know what the sentence means. You can picture it. You can react. That's why it feels so strange when someone who doesn't speak a language can still sort sentences correctly. Where does their understanding come from? Do they even need understanding, or can they just follow rules? Let's take it further. Say you design a computer that can pass a grammar test in English. You feed it sentences. It labels them as correct or incorrect. Its answers match those of an English teacher. But this computer never learned English in any normal way. It doesn't read, speak, or listen. It just processes inputs and follows algorithms. Is this computer using real knowledge of English, or is it just mimicking what understanding looks like? Now think of the Mandarin speaker again. She follows rules. She sees symbols and puts them into groups. The symbols have no meaning for her. Yet, by rule following alone, she sorts the sentences as well as someone who speaks English. The paradox is this: we want to say she doesn't know English, but we also want to say she demonstrates knowledge of English grammar. We're stuck between two truths that won't sit together. The heart of the paradox is in what we mean by knowledge. If knowledge means getting the right answer, then the Mandarin speaker knows English grammar. If knowledge means understanding what the words mean, then she doesn't. But can you have one without the other? This leads to a deeper problem. What does it mean to understand anything? When you say you understand a language, do you mean you can use it? Do you mean you can explain it? Do you mean it makes sense in your mind? Each of these definitions points in a different direction. Say someone hands you a guitar. You press a button, and it plays a perfect song. Did the guitar understand the song? No, it just followed instructions. But when a person plays the song by memory, we say they understand it. The sound might be the same, but the process is different. Now imagine a classroom. A teacher gives a grammar worksheet to two students. One is fluent in English. The other only speaks Mandarin, but has a copy of a secret answer key written in symbols she understands. They both get every question right. To the teacher, they seem equal, but only one understands the language. The other is solving a puzzle without knowing the bigger picture. This is the core of the Mandarin paradox. It forces us to ask if following the right steps is enough. Is doing the task the same as knowing how and why the task works? It's not a small question. It touches everything from artificial intelligence to how we teach kids. In computer science, people talk about syntax and semantics. Syntax is the structure, how symbols are put together. Semantics is the meaning, what those symbols stand for. Computers are great at syntax. They can parse code, match patterns, and flag errors. But do they understand semantics? The Mandarin paradox suggests they don't. A machine might pass a grammar test without knowing any language at all, just like the Mandarin speaker who can sort English sentences. But now consider a real-world example. Translation apps are everywhere. You type in a sentence, and the app gives you another sentence in a new language. Often, the output is useful. The grammar checks out. The words fit the context, but the app doesn't know what you're trying to say in any human sense. It processes input and gives output. It performs well without true understanding. This brings us back to the room. The person inside the room does not understand what the symbols mean. But if the symbols are always responded to correctly, is there a difference between the person and a real language speaker? Some people say yes. They argue that understanding must come from experience, intention, and awareness. A person knows what a dog is because they've seen one, played with one, maybe even feared one. A machine or a rule follower in a room never had that. So even if they get the answer right, it's not the same. It can't be. Others say no. They claim that if all the answers are correct, then it doesn't matter how you got there. They argue that intelligence is what intelligence does. If you can sort sentences like a native speaker, you are, for all practical purposes, showing the same kind of intelligence. The Mandarin paradox doesn't give us a final answer. It sits in the middle. It asks us to look again at what we think we know. It forces a split between performance and comprehension, between appearance and reality, between rules and meaning. Imagine now a world where everyone speaks a different language. To survive, they all learn to follow the same set of signs and rules. They don't understand each other's words, but they act in ways that look like they do. From the outside, it looks like communication, but on the inside, it's just pattern matching. That's the world the Mandarin paradox makes us imagine. A world where we cannot always trust what understanding looks like, where doing the task might not mean knowing the task, where sorting the sentence does not prove that the sentence makes sense to you. And yet, in our world, we often rely on exactly these kinds of systems: grammar checkers, auto-translators, chatbots. They all perform tasks that seem to require understanding. The Mandarin paradox reminds us that performance is not the same thing as comprehension. It pushes us to ask, what are we building? What are we teaching? What counts as knowing? When you see a correct answer, it's easy to assume there's knowledge behind it. But the paradox warns us not to jump too fast. There may be nothing behind the answer, but a set of rules, followed without meaning. The symbols go in, the symbols come out, and we mistake the process for thought. Imagine you're on a game show. You stand in front of 3 closed doors. Behind one of them is a car. Behind the other 2 are goats. You want the car. The host, Monty Hall, asks you to pick a door. You choose door 1. Monty, who knows what's behind all the doors, opens door 3. Behind it, there's a goat. He then gives you a choice. Do you want to stay with door 1 or switch to door 2? At first, it feels like it shouldn't matter. There are 2 doors left. One has a car. One has a goat. Seems like it's 50-50. So switching or staying should make no difference. But this feeling is wrong. The odds are not equal. They were never equal. This is the heart of the Monty Hall problem. Let's walk through it slowly. When you first pick a door, you have a 1 in 3 chance of picking the car. That means there's a 2 in 3 chance the car is behind one of the other 2 doors. This is simple probability. Nothing tricky, just 1 car and 3 doors. Let's say you pick door 1. That's your first move. There's a 1 in 3 chance the car is behind door 1. There's a 2 in 3 chance the car is behind door 2 or door 3. Now, Monty opens one of the other 2 doors. He never opens the door with the car. He always shows you a goat. This is key. Monty knows where the car is. He will never open the door with the car by accident. Suppose the car is behind door 2. You pick door 1. Monty opens door 3 to show a goat. If you switch to door 2, you win the car. Suppose the car is behind door 3. You pick door 1. Monty opens door 2 to show a goat. Again, if you switch, you win the car. In both of these cases, switching gives you the car. These are the 2 in 3 cases where your first guess was wrong. Monty helps you by removing one bad option. He cannot open the door with the car, so he points you at the only other unopened door. If you switch, you now choose from the 2/3 group. Now consider the one time you win by staying. That happens only if your first guess was right. You pick door 1. The car is behind door 1. Monty opens either door 2 or door 3 to show a goat. You stay and you win. That's the 1 in 3 case. 1 time out of 3, you pick the car from the start. In the other 2 cases, you picked a goat, and switching would win the car. You win 2 out of 3 times if you switch. You win 1 out of 3 times if you stay. The math is simple, but the idea feels strange. Let's try it with numbers. Suppose you play this game 300 times. You always pick door 1. The car is placed randomly. That means about 100 times, the car is behind door 1. About 100 times, it's behind door 2. About 100 times, it's behind door 3. In the 100 times the car is behind door 1, you win if you stay. Monty opens one of the other 2 doors. You stick with door 1 and get the car. In the other 200 games, the car is behind door 2 or 3. You pick door 1, but you're wrong. Monty opens the door with a goat. If you switch, you get the car. You win 200 times by switching. You only win 100 times by staying. That's a 2-to-1 advantage. It doesn't feel right, but the numbers show it. You're better off switching. People often don't believe this at first, even smart people. Some assume Monty might open a door at random, but the rules matter. Monty always opens a door with a goat. He never opens the door with the car, and he always offers the choice to switch. If he didn't follow those rules, the odds would change. It helps to look at extreme cases. Say, there are 100 doors. One has a car. You pick door 1. There's a 1 in 100 chance you pick the car. There's a 99 in 100 chance the car is behind one of the other doors. Monty, who knows everything, opens 98 other doors. All of them have goats. He leaves only door 1, your pick, and door 42 unopened. Now, do you switch? Of course you switch. The chance that the car is behind door 1 is still 1 in 100. The chance it's behind door 42 is now 99 in 100. Monty didn't pick door 42 at random. He left it closed on purpose. The logic is the same in the 3-door version, just smaller numbers. When Monty removes one wrong door, he doesn't even the odds. He reveals information. He shifts the weight toward the door you didn't pick. Some people think Monty is trying to trick you, but that's not the case. He isn't trying to help or hurt you. He just follows the rules. He opens a door with a goat. He offers a switch. The structure of the game does the rest. If you simulate the game on a computer, the results make it clear. Run it 1,000 times. Always stay, and you'll win about 33% of the time. Always switch, and you'll win about 66% of the time. The gap is too large to ignore. Even after all this, it still might feel wrong. That's normal. The brain wants to treat the 2 remaining doors as equal, but they aren't. The first choice had a 1 in 3 chance. That never changed. Monty's action only confirms the other doors were more likely to begin with. Let's do another walkthrough. You pick door 1. 1/3 chance of being right, 2/3 chance of being wrong. Car is behind door 2 or 3. If the car is behind door 2, Monty opens door 3. If the car is behind door 3, Monty opens door 2. Either way, he opens the door with a goat. Then you switch. You get the car. Only if your first guess was correct do you lose by switching. That's 1 case out of 3. Monty's choice isn't random. It's guided by what's behind the doors. That makes the odds lean toward the switch. He filters out a bad door. He does this every time. That gives you more power than you started with. When you first pick, when Monty opens a door, he's not guessing. He's showing you something. That changes the situation. You now have more information. The game isn't about luck anymore. It becomes a test of whether you trust the numbers. People who test this in the real world almost always become convinced. Try it with 3 cards and a friend. 1 card is an ace. The others are jokers. Your friend lays them face down. You pick one. They peek at the cards, then show you a joker from the other 2. They offer you the switch. Track your wins over time. You'll see the pattern. What starts as a gut feeling turns into a clear advantage. The game is built to fool your intuition, but it rewards the player who understands how information works. The Monty Hall problem shows how easy it is to confuse chance and choice. It's not about guessing better. It's about realizing what new information means. Monty's move isn't neutral. It's a message. If you listen to it, you win more often. Morton's fork is a situation where a person faces 2 options, and both lead to the same negative outcome. The phrase comes from the 15th century, named after John Morton, who was Lord Chancellor to King Henry VII. He used a kind of logic to justify taking money from both the rich and the poor. If someone lived modestly, he assumed they must be saving money so they could afford to give to the king. If someone lived extravagantly, he assumed they clearly had enough money so they should give as well. Either way, the outcome was the same. The person had to pay. That's the essence of Morton's fork. No matter which path you take, you're trapped. It's not a trick or an illusion. It's a type of reasoning that boxes people in. This kind of thinking appears in many places today: government, workplaces, education, and even personal relationships. It often hides behind logic, but when you look closely, it's about control, not choice. Picture an employee in a company that's trying to cut costs. If they work late every night, their manager might say they're inefficient and can't get their job done during normal hours. If they leave on time, their manager might say they lack commitment. Either way, the employee is criticized. They're stuck. That's Morton's fork. Or consider a student applying for university. If they list many extracurricular activities, an admissions officer might say they're spread too thin and don't focus. If they list only a few, the officer might say they lack initiative. Either approach can be used to deny the application. The student can't win. The outcome is already tilted against them, and the reasoning is built to justify it, not to question it. This type of reasoning isn't always obvious. It's usually disguised as fairness. People will say we judge every case on its own merits, but that's not what happens. Instead, the person in power uses the same logic to justify opposing judgments. That's what Morton did. He made it seem like he was being reasonable, but he wasn't. He just wanted the money. In modern business settings, Morton's fork often appears in performance reviews. Say an employee speaks up in meetings, they might be told they're too assertive or dominate the conversation. If they stay quiet, they might be told they don't contribute. Either way, the manager builds a case against them, not because of what they do, but because the outcome, discipline, demotion, or dismissal, was already decided. The reasoning is just a tool to get there. This tactic is hard to challenge because it looks rational on the surface. Each part of the fork seems logical. If someone spends too much, they must have money. If they spend too little, they must be hiding money. But the logic only works if you already believe the person is guilty. You don't question the goal, you just justify it. In law enforcement, this kind of logic can be dangerous. If someone runs from police, they must be guilty. If they cooperate too much, they might be trying to hide something. The interpretation always bends toward guilt. It removes the possibility of neutrality or innocence. The person is judged not on evidence, but on the shape of the trap they're in. Morton's fork can also show up in healthcare. A patient who insists they're ill may be called a hypochondriac. A patient who downplays symptoms may be seen as hiding something serious. In both cases, the doctor might dismiss them. The fork doesn't come from medical facts, but from assumptions. The logic works backward from the doctor's belief, not forward from the patient's condition. In politics, Morton's fork helps leaders make unpopular decisions look justified. A country that increases defense spending during peace is seen as preparing for threats. If they reduce spending, they're seen as weak and inviting danger. Either way, the decision is framed to support the same conclusion: more control, more power, fewer questions. Public debate gets reduced to two choices that lead to the same place. In families, it might take the form of emotional pressure. A parent might say, "If you love me, you'll do what I ask." But if the child refuses, they're accused of being cold or selfish. If they agree, they're seen as weak or dependent. The child is caught. The fork isn't about love or independence. It's about control. What makes Morton's fork effective is its subtlety. It doesn't shout. It doesn't force. It leads you calmly toward a conclusion and makes you feel like you walked there yourself. But the road was already chosen. The fork only gives the illusion of choice. Even technology can create versions of this trap. A social media platform might say, if you post a lot, you're addicted. If you post nothing, you're antisocial. The platform sets the rules for what's normal and then uses those rules to judge users no matter what they do. The result is always the same. The user is wrong, and the platform stays in control. In hiring, Morton's fork appears when a company says they want diversity but rejects candidates for not being a culture fit. If someone brings a different perspective, they're seen as disruptive. If they try to blend in, they're seen as lacking authenticity. Either way, they're filtered out. The company's stated goal and their actual practice contradict each other, but the logic bends to fit. In public discussions, this reasoning often shuts down debate. If someone questions a policy, they might be called uninformed. If they know too much, they're called biased. If they stay neutral, they're accused of lacking values. No matter how they speak, their view can be dismissed. The fork isn't about truth, it's about removing disagreement. What makes all these examples alike is that the person in the weaker position can't escape. The fork limits the field of play. It removes the middle ground and shapes every move to look wrong. It's not just unfair, it's designed that way. Morton's original idea was simple: get money for the crown, no matter what. The logic followed the goal, not the other way around. That part hasn't changed. Today, Morton's fork shows up wherever power needs to explain itself without being questioned. It's not about reason, it's about control that sounds reasonable. The best way to spot a Morton's fork is to look for outcomes that never change, even when behavior does. If every action leads to the same judgment, then logic isn't being used to find the truth, it's being used to trap someone. In real life, people often don't know they're caught until it's too late. The logic seems solid until you notice the pattern. That's when you see it. No matter what you do, the answer is already in place. A pilot is flying a commercial airliner across a well-traveled road. The skies are clear, the autopilot is on, the road is familiar, the procedures are routine. Yet, something goes wrong. The pilot, relying on automation and expecting everything to be just as it always is, misses a critical detail. The mistake builds. There's no clear warning, no big moment, just a small issue, not caught in time, that leads to a dangerous situation. This is the navigation paradox. The navigation paradox is the idea that as navigation tools become better, safer, and more reliable, the risk of accidents doesn't drop in the way you'd expect. In some cases, it increases. That sounds backwards. But when you look at what happens when people rely too much on navigation systems, the paradox starts to make sense. Modern navigation tools reduce uncertainty. Pilots and drivers used to rely on visual cues, maps, and knowledge of terrain. That took skill. It also kept them more engaged. GPS and automated systems make it easier to get from point A to point B. They reduce workload, but they also change the way people behave. One example comes from aviation. Pilots fly aircraft with powerful onboard computers. The systems manage speed, altitude, heading, and more. Most of the time, they do this well. But the more reliable the systems are, the less the pilots intervene. They monitor instead of fly. That creates a gap between the pilot's knowledge and the machine's actions. This isn't just theory. Look at the crash of Air France Flight 447 in 2009. The aircraft flew into a storm. The pitot tubes, which measure airspeed, iced over. The autopilot disengaged. The aircraft handed control back to the pilots. But by then, the pilots had not been actively flying the plane. They didn't recognize the stall. They made control inputs that made things worse. The plane crashed into the Atlantic. All 228 people on board died. The crew had relied on automation. When it failed, they weren't ready. The paradox shows up in driving too. GPS navigation is reliable. Drivers follow it without question. But when the GPS gives a wrong route or doesn't reflect road conditions, drivers still follow it. They defer to the device instead of using their judgment. There are cases of trucks getting stuck under low bridges, buses being routed onto dirt paths, and tourists driving into lakes. These aren't just one-off stories. They reflect a pattern of trust placed in the system, even when the evidence on the ground says otherwise. It's easy to say these are mistakes made by careless people, but that misses the point. The systems are designed to make things easier, and they do. But the ease creates overconfidence. The more you trust the system, the less you double-check. That's the heart of the paradox. Better systems lead to better outcomes until they don't. And when they fail, people aren't always ready to take over. In maritime navigation, large vessels use electronic chart display and information systems, ISDIS. These systems give detailed maps, position data, and alerts. They reduce the need for paper charts and manual plotting. But ships have run aground because officers relied too much on ECDS. In some cases, they didn't check the chart scale. In others, they ignored alarms. The screen gave a false sense of control. The technology was sound, the use of it was not. The paradox doesn't argue against using advanced navigation tools. The systems work. They reduce accidents overall. but they change the way humans interact with the task. People adapt to tools. They offload attention. They become passive. And passive control doesn't catch edge cases. It doesn't spot the one time the GPS leads you wrong, or the one time the autopilot gives up when you least expect it. Think about a mountain hiker using a GPS watch. The trail isn't marked. The device shows a route. The hiker follows it, even when the terrain looks wrong. Without the watch, the hiker might stop and look around, take note of the sun, the slope, the path. With the watch, there's no pause. Just follow the line. If the battery dies or the route is wrong, the hiker might be in trouble, not because the tool failed, but because the tool made them stop thinking. There's also the problem of deskilling. When people don't use a skill, they lose it. A pilot who rarely hand flies an aircraft might struggle when they have to. A sailor who relies on GPS may no longer know how to navigate by compass and chart. A driver who follows voice directions may not know the layout of their own town. The skill fades. That wouldn't matter if the systems were perfect, but they aren't. And when they fail, the person in charge needs to take over, often fast and under stress. Imagine a delivery driver working a route they've never driven before. Their phone shows turn-by-turn directions. They follow them, but the map doesn't show a recent road closure. They take a turn and end up on a one-way street heading the wrong direction. If the driver knew the city layout, they might have questioned the turn, but they didn't need to know the layout until they did. That's the navigation paradox again. There's also a subtle pressure to trust the system even when you doubt it. In a group setting, like a ship's bridge or a cockpit, a person might see something that feels off, but the system shows all green. The automation says everything is fine. Speaking up becomes harder. The system has more authority than the human. People defer to the tech. That's dangerous, especially when the system is wrong and no one checks. There's a case from a commercial ship entering a busy port. The officer on watch noticed the course line went over a shallow area, but the ECDS didn't raise an alarm. The master trusted the line. The ship ran aground. Later investigation showed the chart scale had been wrong. The officer had noticed, but they didn't insist. The system didn't back them up, so they said nothing. These situations are hard to train for. You can teach someone how to use a system. You can show them what happens when it fails. But the real problem is behavior. You can't easily teach people to stay alert when everything seems fine. You can't teach judgment with a checklist. You can encourage questioning, promote active monitoring, and build habits. But those take time and experience. Some organizations now require regular hand-flying practice for pilots. Others insist on using paper backups or running scenarios where automation fails. These are ways to keep the human in the loop. Not as a backup, but as a partner to the system. That's the right way to think about it. The person isn't there just in case. They're there all the time, watching, thinking, ready to step in. Navigation tools are useful. They've made travel safer, faster, and easier, but they change how people think and act. The paradox is that the safer the system, the more people trust it, and the more they trust it, the less prepared they are when it breaks. That's not a reason to abandon technology. It's a reason to use it with care. Always assume it can fail. Stay engaged, stay curious, know the route, don't just follow the line. Two friends each receive a gift box with a necktie inside. They don't know how much their own tie is worth, but they do know this: one tie costs twice as much as the other. The friend with the more expensive tie wins a small prize from a third person. But here's the twist. Before opening the boxes, one friend says to the other, "It doesn't matter which tie I get. I always expect to come out ahead if we trade ties." This seems strange. How can you expect to gain from a trade if the same logic applies to the other person? If both expect to benefit, where does that benefit come from? Let's walk through the reasoning slowly. Suppose I open my box and see a tie. I don't know if it's the cheap one or the expensive one. If it's the cheap one, then yours is worth twice as much. If it's the expensive one, then yours is worth half as much. In other words, there's a 50% chance I'll gain if I trade and a 50% chance I'll lose. So far, that sounds fair. Now imagine my tie is worth $20. Then, either you have the $10 tie or you have the $40 tie. If we assume both options are equally likely, then if I trade, I could end up with a $10 tie or a $40 tie. That averages out to $25, which is more than the $20 I started with. That makes it seem like a good idea to trade. That's the paradox. From this logic, it looks like I should always trade no matter what. But you can make the same argument. So both of us should want to trade, thinking we'll come out ahead. But we can't both come out ahead by swapping. That's not possible. We have the same two ties. How can we each expect to gain? That's the puzzle. And it feels tight. It seems logical, but it breaks down once you poke at the assumptions. Go back to the part where we said there's a 50% chance I have the cheap tie and a 50% chance I have the expensive one. That feels fair. But where does that probability come from? We assumed it. We said either my tie is worth half yours or twice yours, and treated both as equally likely. But that's a mistake. Once I know my tie is worth $20, the odds that the other tie is $10 or $40 depend on how the prices were picked in the first place. If ties could be any value at all, then there's no real way to say the $10 and $40 outcomes are equally likely. Maybe one is more probable than the other. Suppose the person handing out the ties only chooses between $10 and $20 ties. Then, if I see a $20 tie, I must have the expensive one. That makes the other one a $10 tie. Trading would be a loss. In this case, there's no paradox. Or suppose the tie values are picked from a wider set of prices. Maybe the cheaper one is chosen randomly from a list of values, like $10, $20, $30, and so on, and then the expensive one is exactly double that. Then, the odds change again. The problem with the paradox is it pretends to know something about probabilities without checking how those probabilities were created. It treats the tie values like they're floating without rules. But if we want to talk about likelihoods, we have to say how the values were assigned. Once we do that, the expected gain from trading can vanish. Let's try a concrete setup. Say there's a hat filled with slips of paper, and each one has a number, 10, 20, 40, 80, up to 1280. That's 10 numbers. A pair of values is chosen by picking one at random and calling it the cheaper tie. Then the expensive one is double that. Now suppose you open your box and find a $160 tie. What's the chance it's the expensive one? Look at the list. The $160 tie could be the cheap tie if the pair was $160 and $320. That means $160 is the cheap one. Or it could be the expensive one from the pair $80 and $160. So the two relevant pairs are 8160 and 160 320. But the number 160 appears in both. So to find the chance your tie is the expensive one, ask, among the pairs that contain 160, how many times is it the larger number? In this list, it's part of 8160 and 160 320. In one, it's the cheap tie, and in the other, it's the expensive one. Each pair is equally likely, so your $160 tie has a 50% chance of being the expensive one. Seems like the paradox is still alive. Trade, and you might end up with a tie worth either $80 or $320s. That averages to $200, and that beats the $160 you started with. So again, it looks like a good deal to trade. But here's the trick. That's not the full story. What happens if you draw a tie worth 1,280s? That's the top of the list. There is no $2560 tie in the game, so if you have the 1,280 tie, it must be the expensive one. That means you're holding the better tie. Trading would only lose you money. Same with the lowest end. If you get the $10 tie, there is no cheaper one in the game, so you must have the cheap tie. Suddenly, the symmetry breaks. At the edges, you can no longer assume the other tie might be double or half yours. The structure of the game matters. The probabilities lean in one direction or the other, depending on where your value sits in the list. As soon as the range of possible tie values is known or limited, you can no longer claim the expected value of the other tie is more than yours. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. It depends on what you know about how tie values are assigned. Without that, you can't say the odds are 50-50. The paradox plays a trick. It invites you to use symmetry and expected value without grounding them in a specific setup. It makes it look like you're reasoning when you're actually assuming. Let's take another route. Imagine you and I play this game. We agree the cheap tie is always $100. The expensive one is always $200. I pick one at random and hand it to you. You get a box with a tie. You open it and see $100. You now know the other must be worth $200. That's fine. But now imagine I don't tell you the price choices ahead of time. You open your box and see $100. You think, maybe the other is $50 or $200. Average of that is $125. That's better than what I have. So you think trading will gain you money, but in reality, there is no $50 tie. That means your estimate of the average is based on a false option. The paradox arises when you imagine values that don't exist in the game. You think the other tie might be $50, even if $50 isn't one of the choices. That false possibility pulls down the average of your current tie. It creates an illusion of gain. That's where expected value gets dangerous. If your expectation includes impossible cases, then it doesn't reflect reality. Let's say it again. The key flaw is assuming the other tie has a value either half or double yours, and that both are equally likely. That's only true if the value distribution supports it. If not, your reasoning falls apart. In short, the necktie paradox isn't really a paradox. It's a warning. Don't trust expected value calculations that float in midair. Anchor them to something. Check where the numbers come from. Look for the limits. Without that, you're just guessing. And sometimes, guessing feels like logic, but it isn't. Newcomb's paradox is a famous problem in decision theory. It involves a simple choice, but the reasoning behind the choice creates a conflict between two common approaches to decision-making. The paradox starts with a scenario involving two boxes and a powerful predictor. Imagine you are standing in front of two boxes. Box A is clear and always contains $1,000. Box B is opaque and contains either $1 million or nothing. A highly reliable predictor, known for being right almost every time, has already made a prediction about your choice. If the predictor thought you would take only box B, then it put $1 million inside it. If the predictor thought you would take both box A and box B, then it left box B empty. You now have a choice. Take both boxes or take only box B. The first way to think about this is by using expected utility. This approach suggests that you should take only box B. The predictor has been reliable in the past, almost always getting it right. If you take only box B, you are likely to get $1 million. If you take both boxes, the predictor probably saw that coming and left box B empty, leaving you with only $1,000. But another way to think about it is through dominance reasoning. This says you should always choose the option that gives you more money no matter what. In this case, if box B is empty, then taking both boxes gets you $1,000, while taking only box B gets you nothing. If box B has $1 million, then taking both boxes gets you $1,000, while taking only box B gets you $1 million. In either case, taking both boxes gives you more money. So using this logic, you should take both boxes. These two lines of reasoning point to different choices. One says take only box B, the other says take both boxes. That's the paradox. You can't use both methods at the same time without running into a contradiction. Each method seems valid on its own, but they give opposite answers when applied to the same problem. The power of Newcomb's paradox comes from how it forces you to choose between these two ways of thinking. Each method feels right, but they can't both be correct here. That tension has sparked long debates among philosophers, economists, and mathematicians. To understand this better, picture a slightly different version of the problem. Let's say you walk into a room and see a robot holding a clipboard. It tells you that it has already made its prediction and placed money in the boxes. You know this robot has predicted other people's choices in this same setup hundreds of times, and it has been right every time. It tells you that it will not change anything now. Your decision comes after everything has been set. Now think about how you might reason. If you truly believe the robot is accurate and that your decision was predicted before you walked in, then your best chance at the $1 million is to take only box B. Past results suggest that those who took only box B walked away with the money. Those who took both got less. So even though you already know what is in box A, $1,000, you may feel it's better to leave it behind. But this doesn't sit right with everyone. Some people feel that the idea of a predictor being that accurate is not realistic. They say, your choice is made now, and nothing can change the contents of the boxes. So if box B has $1 million, then you get even more by taking both. If it doesn't, at least you get $1,000 from box A. They think it doesn't make sense to ignore that guaranteed money. Others push back, saying the question isn't about whether the predictor is magic or not. It's about what kind of reasoning gets you the best outcome. Even if you don't know how the predictor works, the results speak for themselves. The pattern shows that one boxing tends to lead to more money. So if you care about results, you should follow what works. Now take this thinking and apply it to a real-life situation. Let's say you're trying to decide whether to trust your gut feeling or follow a calculated plan. Maybe you're choosing between starting a business or taking a safe job offer. Your gut tells you that taking the risk will lead to a big payoff, and you have a strong sense that success will follow if you commit. But the safe job gives you a guaranteed income. The predictor in Newcomb's paradox is like your future self, imagining what choice will lead to the best long-term outcome. If you believe your gut is like the predictor, then going all in, choosing only box B, might feel right. You trust that confidence leads to the result you want. But the safe job, like box A, gives you something guaranteed, and if the big payoff still happens, taking both seems like the better move. This shows how the paradox connects to questions about free will, trust, and how we make choices. One side suggests your current choice influences the past, or at least it lines up with what was already predicted. The other side says your choice has no effect on the past, so take what you can now. There are also arguments about how much control you really have. If the predictor is so good at knowing what you'll do you actually have a choice? Or are you just playing out something that was already decided? Some say that this doesn't mean you're not free, it just means your actions are part of a pattern that can be known ahead of time. Others argue that if your choice is truly free, no one should be able to predict it with high accuracy. Then there's the question of what it means to cause something. If your choice now seems to cause the money to be in the box before you chose, how does that work? Does time work differently in this problem? Or does it just mean we need to rethink what causing something really means? Some people try to avoid the paradox by saying the setup is flawed. They claim that a perfect predictor can't exist, or that the predictor's success is based on a trick. Others say the whole point of the paradox is to make you see that our usual ideas about time, choice, and reason don't always fit together. In the end, Newcomb's paradox is not just a puzzle about money and boxes. It's a way to explore deeper questions. What kind of reasoning do we trust? What does it mean to make a good choice? And how do we handle uncertainty when the stakes are high? The debate continues because the paradox touches on so many areas. It brings in logic, psychology, probability, and even philosophy of mind. And because the problem is simple to state but hard to solve, it keeps pulling people in. Whether you're a one-boxer or a two-boxer, the paradox shows that our ideas about choice are more complex than they first seem. Parrondo's paradox shows how two losing strategies can combine into a winning one. On the surface, it sounds impossible. If something doesn't work, and then you pair it with another thing that also doesn't work, how can the result be better? But this isn't a trick. It's a real effect that shows up in game theory, physics, and even economics. The key is in how the systems interact and the way outcomes shift when you alternate between them. The paradox comes from a game designed by physicist Juan Parrondo. It began as a way to explain a concept in physics called Brownian ratchets, where random motion can produce order. But it quickly took on a life of its own because it challenges how we think about probability and success. In the simplest version of the game, there are two separate games, Game A and Game B. Game A is easy to explain. You flip a biased coin. This coin lands heads 49% of the time and tails 51% of the time. Every time you get heads, you win $1. Tails, you lose $1. Over time, you expect to lose because the coin is tilted just slightly against you. The edge is small, but in the long run, it drains your money. That's a losing game. Game B is more complicated. It uses two coins. The coin you flip depends on your current amount of money. If your total is divisible by 3, you use a very bad coin. This one wins only 9% of the time. The rest of the time, you lose. But if your total is not divisible by 3, you use a better coin. This one gives you a win 74% of the time, so you have one terrible coin and one good one, and which one you get depends on your money. Even though the good coin seems strong, the structure makes Game B a losing game too. The bad coin comes up often enough to sink your progress. Now, here's where it gets strange. If you alternate between Game A and Game B in the right sequence, you start winning over time. You could play AABB or AAB, or even choose randomly between them. The exact sequence affects the result, but many patterns lead to gains. Each game by itself pulls you down, but together they lift you up. This is the paradox. Losing plus losing equals winning. To understand how this works, it helps to look deeper into how the games behave. Game A chips away at your money slowly. Game B is sneakier. It tricks you into using that terrible coin often by setting up your money to be divisible by 3. That's how you end up with the 9% coin more than you'd like. The trick of combining the games breaks this cycle. By playing Game A, you shift your money total away from the danger zone. That means that when you switch back to Game B, you're more likely to land on the better coin. So instead of being trapped in a loop where you keep hitting the bad coin, you get more of the good one. In this way, the slight loss from Game A acts like a kind of reset that lets Game B work better. Think of it like walking on a steep hill. If you try to walk straight up, you slip and fall. That's playing just Game B. If you walk sideways along the slope, you go nowhere. That's Game A. But if you zigzag across the hill, shifting directions at the right time, you can move upward. That's what happens when you alternate the games. The combination gives you a path that isn't obvious from either part on its own. This kind of effect shows up in other places too. In finance, an investor might hold 2 assets that both have negative returns. But if those assets are negatively correlated, meaning when one goes down, the other often goes up, the right switching strategy can make the whole portfolio profitable. It's not magic. It's how timing and structure interact with risk. In biology, similar patterns emerge. Some treatments in medicine work better when cycled than when used alone. A drug might stop working over time because the body adapts. But if you switch between 2 drugs, even if each one is weak on its own, the body doesn't adapt as fast. That keeps the treatment effective longer. Even in social systems, the idea can apply. A worker might face burnout doing a hard job every day, but alternating between 2 different tough tasks, each with its own rhythm, can reduce fatigue. The change itself becomes a benefit. The idea behind Parrondo's paradox is that context matters. It's not just what a move does on its own, it's also how it affects the system you're part of. When you take an action, it shifts your state. That state then shapes the next outcome. So 2 bad moves can set up the next step in a way that makes it good. It's about the sequence, not just the parts. To see it another way, picture a ball rolling on a surface with bumps and dips. If you push the ball straight forward, it gets stuck in the dips. That's like a losing game. But if you nudge it in a zigzag, the ball may keep moving. The extra motion helps it escape the traps. This is how alternating strategies can bypass the pitfalls that each one falls into when used alone. The paradox doesn't work in every case. The games have to be set up in just the right way. If the coins are too unfair or the switching is off, the result is still a loss. But the main idea stays the same. The whole can behave better than its parts. You can't just look at individual moves and judge them. You have to see the system as a whole and how one step changes the landscape for the next. In practical terms, this means we sometimes misjudge strategies. A person might try something and see it doesn't work. Then they try something else and get the same bad result, so they assume neither will help. But if they tried combining them, they might find success. This could happen in learning, business, or problem solving. The answer isn't always in finding the best move, but in finding the right mix. Parrondo's paradox reminds us that timing and sequence shape outcomes. When we judge actions in isolation, we miss patterns. Sometimes success comes not from strength, but from the way weak steps line up. This can feel strange, but it's a pattern that plays out again and again in real systems. The lesson is not to ignore losses, but to look deeper into how they interact. A losing step may still be a useful tool if it opens the door to a better path. The way forward might be hidden in the space between moves. That's where the paradox lives, at the edge of logic, where the pieces don't make sense on their own, but come together to reveal something more. Pascal's mugging starts off sounding kind of weird, but the more you think about it, the more it messes with how you reason about risk and reward. Picture this. You're walking down the street and some guy stops you. He looks totally normal. Then he says, "Give me $5. If you do, I'll use my alien tech to create 10 to the power of 30 happy people in another dimension." You ask for proof. He doesn't have any. No ID, no spaceship, nothing. Just a confident look and this pitch about massive rewards. You figure he's joking, or maybe he's not all there. But then your brain kicks in. You start thinking in terms of expected value. Expected value is simple. You take the odds of something happening and multiply it by how big the result would be. A 1 in a million shot at $1 million? That's worth $1 on average. If someone offers that to you and you trust the numbers, you'd probably take it. That's fine when the numbers are grounded. But in this case, the guy's offering a reward so big that even if the odds are super low, like 1 in a trillion, the payoff is still enormous. So mathematically, it still seems worth it to give him the $5. And here's the kicker. If he tells you he can make even more people happy, say 10 to the power of 50, the math gets even more persuasive, even though the story gets harder to believe. The lower the chance, the higher the reward he promises, and there's no bottom, no limit to how far this goes. The logic starts to twist in on itself. You're not getting mugged by a guy, you're getting mugged by your own reasoning. It gets worse when you imagine this happening more than once. Let's say 5 more people stop you. Each one asks for a small amount of money. Each one promises more than the last. First 10 to the power of 100 happy lives, then 10 to the power of 200 people saved from suffering. The numbers are huge, the chances are tiny, but your math brain keeps saying, maybe. And if you keep listening to that logic, you'll end up broke, distracted, maybe even obsessed with chasing the biggest numbers, all based on claims you don't believe in and people who have no proof. This whole thought experiment is called Pascal's mugging. It's named after Blaise Pascal, the guy who said you should believe in God because the reward, if you're right, is infinite, eternal salvation. Even if there's only a tiny chance, the gain is too big to ignore. Pascal's mugging takes that same logic and shows how it can break down. It becomes a kind of cheat code for convincing you to act on wild ideas, as long as they come with big enough numbers attached. You see this kind of reasoning pop up in discussions about artificial intelligence, especially when people talk about the long-term future. Someone might say, if we get AI right, we could save 10 to the power of 50 lives in the far future, so we have to work on this one thing, right now. Even if there's only a tiny chance of success, the reward is so huge, the math says we should do it. That logic can be dangerous. It pulls focus away from practical problems. It rewards speculation over grounded work. And it starts to put pressure on people, moral pressure. What if you ignore the guy and he's right? What if you pass up the one shot to save 1 trillion lives? It's not just about numbers anymore. It becomes emotional. It becomes moral. And the guilt starts to creep in. To try and fix this, some people say we should set a minimum cutoff. Like if the chance of something happening is less than 1 in a billion, we just treat it as 0. That keeps us from getting pulled into fantasy. But it's arbitrary. Who decides where the line goes? Others say we should discount future outcomes. Maybe 10 to the power of 100 happy lives isn't something we need to factor into decisions here and now. But again, who gets to make that call? There's another fix. Some say when someone makes a claim that far out, it's not just unlikely, it's not even something you can assign odds to. There's no good way to put a number on it. And if you can't do that, maybe you shouldn't treat it like an expected value problem at all. But that means deciding when expected value works and when it doesn't. And that's hard, because if you throw it out in one case, you might start throwing it out in others, cases where it actually helps you make good decisions. Expected value is useful for gambling, for business, for insurance, for planning. But when you apply it to wild, unprovable scenarios with infinite or near-infinite stakes, it breaks. You end up doing things that feel obviously wrong, but technically rational. It shakes your trust in reason. You want logic to guide you. You want to think clearly and choose wisely. But here's a situation where clean math starts pulling you toward absurd behavior. Not because you made a mistake in calculation, but because the logic doesn't know when to stop. And that's the real tension. This isn't about one weird guy on the street. This is about the tools we use to think and what happens when they get hijacked. When logic, used the wrong way, stops serving you and starts controlling you. Pascal's mugging isn't just a thought experiment. It's a warning. When the numbers get too big and the odds too small, reason itself can become the mugger. And if you're not careful, you'll give in. Not because you were tricked, but because you followed the math too far.